Right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first public meeting of the Lincolnshire Integrated Care Board. How exciting. Welcome, everybody. Can everybody hear me on the screen? Morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Good, excellent, welcome. And I'm going to just kick off, rather than a round of welcomes and introductions, which we did last time. I'll kick off, unless people do want to go around again, very happy to. But I'll just kick off with apologies, if I may, and then, Jules, before we do that, do you want to just pick up just one or two issues, just so we know, so everybody knows? Yeah.
So we've got Microsoft Teams, that's my account on the screen there, and I am recording this because I use it for minutes back up, but because we will put this on the website this afternoon. We would normally do this as a live event. I'll use a polite term, someone interfered with my screen and disconnected something, which is unfortunately knocked out Teams on the screen, so we can't get in that way. So normally, if we were in here in future, to enable access to people who don't want to travel and to staff who like to listen in, we would hold this as a live event. So whilst it's up on the screen, it's not live. Only the Jonathan, Simon and Sarah obviously can see into this meeting at the moment, which is why my laptop sat down there and facing this room, so they can see the large majority of you. So when they want to come in, if they need questions, Jonathan has said he'll be waving his arms mostly. So yeah, so they will obviously remain on mute. So we can't hear their background noise unless they want to speak. So that's where we are today.
Lovely, thanks very much indeed, Jules. So we'll kick off then with item 1.1, which is apologies.
Yeah, so we have a few. So we've got Matt Bosch, Sarah J. Mills, Pete Moore, Jerry McSorley, Derek Ward, Charlie Barlow, and Sarah Fletcher. But we have Dean O'Dell here for Sarah, and Andy Fox is here for Derek.
So welcome, Dean, and welcome, Andy. Thank you very much indeed. And we've got a mixture, I think, of summer leave and one or two people who are not quite so good at the moment. So we wish them, speedy recovery. So welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. Okay, item 1.2, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest with regard to the business today that we're dealing with? If not, thank you very much indeed. And we'll then move to item 1.3, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 1st of July. And just like to ask if there are any corrections, if anybody wants to make on any of those of the minutes. So shall we just quickly around page 1, page 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, so people happy? Thank you very much indeed. I'll sign those then as a correct record. Thank you very much indeed. So it was that was easy. It won't always be as easy, I'm sure, but obviously it was a setup. Yeah, it was a setup meeting. So thank you. So item 1.4 then, matters arising, including the action log. So I think there were three matters arising. So first of all, declarations of interest. And several students, but
yeah, I can confirm that all been done, Andrew, and I'm in receipt of all of them. So that's all looking good. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much indeed. And action log number 2, comments that Jonathan made about comparability between there is now I think it's a good point to say, I think members of the board will know that Derek very kindly was going on to do a health and equality session this afternoon for us, and unfortunately he's not too well at the moment, and as a result the right thing was to do is to stand him down, as we said in the note yesterday. We'll rearrange that, and that question, Jonathan, we'll handle at that time, if that's all. If that's okay. Thanks. And then the last one was about the business conduct and conflicts of interest policy. Bill, anything you want to say on that, or is it?
No, so we did look into it, and we couldn't find any reference in NHS England guidance to an expiration time. I know some people have gone back a bit further on their registers just to cover that up. But yeah, we couldn't find anything specific.
Right. Okay. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Then that's fine. So you're happy with that. Let's move on to item 2 and update and overview. You know, from me, and what I want to kind of handle in these sessions is really a national view, regional view, Lincolnshire view, and I think my reflections will be quite broad brush, really. And they're there for a discussion. And I know that John and your reflections think a lot more about really, you know, what's going on. So I think my first reflection is that we need to be really clear and focused on what our ICS is going to do as a system, and what our, you know, integrated care board, where we can add value. And that's adding value with obviously the public and patients, with our staff, with our organisations and the services we provide, with the you know, the NHS local authority, the care sector, the voluntary sector, through all the services that we provide, you know, mental health services, community services, hospital services, children and young people, ambulance services, maternity services, primary care services, and so on. And so first big reflection on me is this is a different type of board. I make no apologies for saying once again, we've put the agenda into the 4 main aims of what the system is about, and therefore it's about health inequalities, it's about access and people to our services and equality of outcome, it's about value for money, and it's about social and economic purpose. And therefore we've tried to stitch the agenda like that, and really those 4 aims. Our next part about clarity is so that we can actually, it's not a word we should do, but it's trying to Lincolnshireize those 4 aims. What does it mean? What are those 4 national purposes that we've got the agenda mean for us? So we have a development session on I think it's the 23rd of August, 2 till 5. And in preparation for us to look at Lincolnshireizing those 4 aims, what they mean for us, Empower have been employed to have individual sessions with you all, to go through what you think, you know, to ask some questions of you, so that we come with a view to that development session about what it means for us, what those 4 questions mean, so that we can begin to get real clarity about 4 national aims, what they mean, the 4 Lincolnshire aims, and what they mean for us. So I know you've got your individual sessions planned up. All that should be ready. Thank you for doing that in the next week or 2. And that development session therefore becomes a big event for us. I realise not everybody will be there because it's holiday period, but it becomes, you know, the focus. So that's my first point I wanted to get over, the development event on the 23rd of August. I mean, I think the second thing I wanted to just say is this very easily operational issues can very easily crowd out strategic issues. And the strategic role of the integrated care board. It's just so easy to do that. So everybody around the table here and in the board will have lived through numerous winters, if I can put it that way. You'll have felt what it's like to go through winter pressures. Be you in the local authority, the NHS, and the primary care, you know what it's like. But nobody around the board table here will have gone through a global pandemic and coming out of that and getting prepared, not just in preparing for the next stage of the pandemic in terms of the vaccination program and so on, making sure that's embedded, but in terms of reform that comes out of that. Nobody here will around the table will have come out. That's a new experience to us all. And so my second observation is we need to be really clear once again about the strategic purpose of the ICB and making sure through the thing I just talked about, the first reflection I had, that we do remain strategic and don't get buried under a waterfall of issues. We're here in a different sort of way to be a board that is strategic, and let's not get too crowded out, which is always a temptation by operational issues. And then my third reflection I just wanted to say is reform, in terms of reform. And I'll remind you that reform for us will be about changing the model, particularly about the care closer to home model, and trying to change a model that is to prevention as opposed to just cure. Very difficult to do this when you've got lots of operational issues going on all the time, because our aim will be to be the best delivery system in terms of operational, but also the best transformational system in terms of the things we choose to concentrate on. But I just think it's very important that we think very carefully about that care closer to home model. And what that leads us into is population health. It leads us into risk stratifying our population across Lincolnshire. It leads us into some of the things that Andy will talk about, no doubt, about the health of the population. But we will begin to provide a different sort of service for different parts of the population. So if you're 1 to 3 years old, you're on a different service than if you're 10 to 20, 10 to 30, and you'll be different if you have 6 lifetime conditions, or in your later years of your life. You will have a different service or level of service that we will want to provide and design, so that we can begin to switch the model to what sometimes can be an over-hospitalised, in NHS term, model. In some areas we will need the hospital to look after patients for longer, depending on the type of condition they have. But essentially, we're looking at a care closer to home model, keeping people in their own homes for as long as we possibly can by wrapping services around the right people. That's the model that we're after. No doubt we'll get to that in our development. We're also after workforce. I mean, I'm sure John will talk in a minute about the Jeremy Hunt report that came out from Parliament yesterday about workforce. But for us, workforce is an absolute key. One of our, I'm sure, top priorities that you'll be identifying individually, but we will need to tackle. And in workforce, we probably need, without jumping too much to a solution, but we will need to have a presence in every school, secondary type school, in the county, in every college, in the university, where it becomes incredibly important to grow our own, keep people in Lincolnshire, and do other things. I'm sure we'll talk about dentistry, we'll talk about the new medical school, we'll talk about things, but we have to create, for the longer term, sustainable workforce models. And finally, in this reform piece that I put in my mind, Culture is really important. The NHS particularly has tried hierarchical leadership, and it works for a while. But what we're trying to do here is a different sort of culture where we work together as a system, respecting, the legal entities of all our various constituent organisations that I listed. What we're trying to do here is an improvement type culture. And on some occasions, our systems will work together. We'll work with Nottingham, Derbyshire, and around us. And on some occasions, most of the cases, we'll work on our own to try and solve our own issues. And I was really, final point about this, since we last met, 3 weeks ago, in 1st of July, but we've had a session with the national team on new HLT, and they're coming out of special measures of soft 4, they call it, to soft 3, and it was just really encouraging, I have to say, to be part of that meeting with all of the national team, saying they do a lot of these meetings around the country, but the Lincolnshire UHLT was a really good meeting. Now it's miles to go. I know there's miles to go yet, but we're on an upward trajectory, and it's really important that we continue that and support UHLT. Our task as a system will be to try and move out of soft 4, special measures, to soft 3. That's what we will want to try and do by March 2023. And so that we continue this trajectory of moving forward and gradually changing to the care closer to home model. So it's been a really interesting first three weeks or so in the job. Been really interesting. They were my reflections, and you also have here the Richard Meddings letter. He's the new NHS England chair, and you'll see he has 7 priorities, and that they range from very operational, obviously urgent emergency care, and ambulance handovers are the biggest issue around at the moment nationally, because people are unnecessarily having pain and suffering in the back of ambulances as they're waiting. So we've got a real issue with this in the National Health Service, through to very strategic establishing this, ICB and systems that we've just been talking about. And you'll see the announcements in the last couple of weeks about staff reductions by bringing in NHS England, digital improvement, health education into one body, and large numbers of staff being lost from the centre, but potentially being taken on by ICBs and systems, which I'm sure John may touch on. And one last thing, and then I'll shut up and we'll have a bit of a discussion about any of the things I've said. One last thing is about the CCG, Lincolnshire CCG assurance letter that you have in front of you, as well as the enclosure. That shows that we have a very good legacy from the CCG that's been handed over to us as an integrated board. There are 12 indicators they judge that legacy on, but again, I think it's a very encouraging letter, and our job is to continue both legally and governance-wise those improvements that have been handed over to us from the ICB. But so there's some of the things that are kind of going on regionally, going on nationally. Huge pressure that we've got on, and obviously in the middle of the politics that we've got going on at the moment, the NHS figures as a very big issue. And is the model broken? Is it not? I mean, I think we need to move on in Lincolnshire into a new type of model and taking all our people with us in a different sort of cultural way that we can try and do it. But I'll pause there and just take some views from 1 or 2 people about that, if that's okay. Yes, please.
Completely understand everything you said. I'm very intrigued as went through the papers as to where the ambulance service feeds into the MCS, because everything else is quite defined. It's obviously not just an Lincolnshire service. So I was slightly confused, and I just need that clarity as to how we really engage with the ambulance.
Yeah, so tomorrow we have something called the NHS Leaders Obsession, which follows on the ICB, and the ambulance service join in there, both non-executive and executive wise. So that's the kind of linchpin for them coming in there. But John,
Yeah, that's a really important point, Dawn, because when we talk about the NHS Trust in Lincolnshire, we tend to think about, ULHC, LPFT and LCHS, but actually the ambulance service are also a trust in Lincolnshire. We do enjoy really close and effective working relationships with the ambulance service. The Chief Executive, Richard Henderson, he comes from the ambulance service in Lincolnshire way back as well, so he's very familiar with the challenges that we've got. So Andrew's quite right. We have this monthly Lincolnshire Leaders group. Andrew chairs. That includes one of their non-execs and their chief executive. I'm a chief executive I'm in regular meetings with Richard, either one-to-one or in wider groups. The contracting arrangements for East Midlands Ambulance Service are handled on, surprisingly, an East Midlands footprint, and Derbyshire ICB actually lead that on behalf of all 5 of the systems in the East Midlands, but it is a collective effort, and we're really close in on that, as you'd expect. I mean, Matt is particularly close in on some of those details at the moment. In terms of the work around urgent and emergency care, I think it's fair to say, Dawn, that's a very regular and ongoing relationship. And Claire, I think in particular, not many days go by, put it that way, when there isn't a lot of active engagement with the ambulance service, both in terms of what's happening in the moment, planning for the weekend, planning for the month ahead, all of those sorts of things. So it is close. I think it is strong and effective, and it is ongoing. Clearly, we Claire will come on to this, and have some really significant issues which are called ambulance handover issues, and obviously there are in a binary sense, but that's really an indication of really significant problems across the whole of urgent and emergency care in Lincolnshire. And Sonil and colleagues through the clinical directorate frame are applying themselves as clinical leaders across the system around a clinical perspective and clinical evidence and clinical change in relation to all of that. So it isn't just being handled through either executive or an operational management frame. It's also being handled through a clinical frame, as you'd expect as well.
Martin.
It's not a separate question, it's a follow-on of what John said. So Don's just to speak from a patient safety quality point of view. So we have got our system quality committee, but underneath that, we've got our system quality group. So Sue Cousland, who's the equivalent of me as the lead for patient safety, sits on that and a very key member. But also our quality leads sit on that group with Derbyshire colleagues and their ICB. So we meet with EMAS on a monthly basis to do the details. So just to give you that layer of operational, well, that'll feed into what's coming up in your quality report today. That's what sits underneath. So I just thought I'd add that bit on, if that makes sense. But yeah, hopefully that's it.
Thanks. Julie.
I totally agree on workforce, and I think that actually needs to be, I think, much more upfront in what we look at, because actually it is what the service is. Without the people, we're nothing. So I think somehow we've got to build that in many layers.
Yes.
The other thing I did wonder was about digital and IT, because that infrastructure, again, communications, making sure that it's seamless is again fundamental to things happening easily, not duplicating things. So again, where does that really fit on our agenda?
Yeah, completely agree. And I mean, I know that this session is a little bit about high level strategic stuff. It is the model. I mean, I don't know. I'd be interested in what colleagues think about NHS England. Will the model change? we're ranging from, the NHS is in complete crisis at the moment, through to workforce, through to will the model change to, I don't know, a different sort of planned care model. Sunil, I don't know if you've got a view. Jonathan, I don't know if you've got a view on anything you're picking up nationally about model. Sunil, what's your take on this?
Essentially, we'll have to change. We can't do it. But already through the pandemic, we've used digital a lot more. So 2 weeks ago, we launched virtual clinics for people needing orthopedic surgery. In the old days, I'd make a referral, they'd wait ages, get an appointment, go to the hospital. Actually, from start to finish, patient came to the surgery, they knew, consultant was on screen, and we made the decision they need direct listing for the list for surgery, and the health clinic's gone, done. So that kind of model not only is better for the patient, but productivity we get.
Yeah.
And actually, for us, what we need to do is connect with our workforce, the values that brought them to the NHS in the first place. That's the bit that's missing. So the value that individual got, treating that patient in a different way, was off the scale. So it isn't just about, it's another person on my list. I've made a real difference to this individual. So we keep some of the value base, but we change the model to work and maximize that digital space, which you quite likely alluded to. We'll come back with lots and lots of initiatives going on. And so people know in Lincolnshire, regionally, we're highlighted as having a workforce issue. And we're about to see a skew in getting more placements, which is really positive. So we're not just looking at now, looking at 10 years hence. So we are beginning to do some of that. So the integration piece around working with Sarah and Maz, we really interested to hear from Sarah's community mental health transformation. It's changing the way we are.
Yeah, I'd just like to come in on the urgent emergency care system. I mean, it's clearly completely broken, isn't it? Not just here, but across the country. And my feeling for some time is that we've got a great opportunity now in PCNs and enabled teams. And I think what we need, rather than this sort of centralised model, is actually devolving a lot of the urgent emergency care down to PCN level with an expanded enabled team. So they're actually the first response for many of these cases. Because a lot of the people that go into hospital are frail elderly patients. We can't always prevent them going in, but actually, if we're involved in proactive care with them, if they do need to go into hospital, we should make that decision. And actually, we should be pulling them out of hospital at the first opportunity. Whereas at the minute, they're picked up by EMAS, they go into hospital, stay there for however long, and often even when they come out, we're not even told, or we're not, we're not part of that sort of discharge planning. I know it's improving to some extent, but I think the best way to reduce the numbers that are going into hospital is for the enabled team. They're the people who know those patients best, based around the practices. And I actually think we just need to completely change the way we're doing things. We did talk in the final throes of the CCG. Yeah, I'm holding moves. It was only 2 weeks. But we did talk about having an urgent emergency care summit, and I actually think that's essential. I think that should be one of the first things we do, and involve the GPs, enabled teams, community services, and see if we can just do things completely differently. Because if we don't, things are just going to get worse.
Yes, I agree. Just before bringing you, Jonathan, I mean, it's interesting. I'll bring it. It's interesting because we've got planned care and we've got urgent emergency care. My sense for the planned care is, 10 years ago or whatever, we created more capacity to do planned care. We created these treatment centres all over the place. Do you remember? Flew people in from abroad and created more capacity effectively than demand. And in the end, that got everybody through the way. And then we created choice, and then patients had choice about where they go. We had competition. Now that was planned care. I can't see that working, so I think it's the digital solution. I think there'll be a lot more diagnostic hubs and all the rest of it. And that politically is an issue that doesn't necessarily have to be part of the National Health Service. Urgent emergency care absolutely does, and I think it has to be a care closer to home strategy is the right one to follow. But it'll be very interesting because we're right on the teetering edge of planned care about which way does it go. Jonathan, would you like to come just give your view about national, regional type things that are going on at the moment?
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Can you hear me okay in the room?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Good. So I am obviously in the infancy of my tenure with the ICB, as the rest of us, but I am already very struck by your comments about strategic thinking. And I think it is going to be difficult for any ICB to get into that mindset, because essentially what one can see happening, so for example, the paper related to CCGs today that's on the agenda, we're being asked to kind of transfer from the era of CCGs to the era of ICBs. But I think the emphasis on service management was much stronger in the CCG, and there's a real risk that ICBs are going to focus on service management, which of course they need to some extent, but that kind of headspace and bandwidth to think about really strategic change is going to be hard won, hard fought to get that. So I think we've got to continue to remind ourselves, about what we're trying to do. The second thing is that I think, we all know, and it's obvious from the kind of data that are being presented in various of the papers today, that the health service nationally is in crisis because of what's happened in the last few years, and probably because of 10 years of underfunding before that. But we probably need to be more rigorous and disciplined in separating out problems we've got that are simply part of the fact that centrally Her Majesty's government is not funding the NHS in the way that many of us feel it requires funding, versus things that are genuinely in our control that we can do within existing resources, but big things. And I think that we've got to try and frame this in terms of, problems we can only solve in relation to an uplift nationally versus problems we can genuinely solve through actions that are within our kind of purview and capability. And I'm very struck by the idea of a big strategic think. I don't know who the last speaker was, I couldn't see them on the screen, about how we offer services. And we've almost got to kind of, to follow up on that particular comment, I feel we've almost got to kind of year zero ourselves and put ourselves back into a situation that so many places in the developing world encounter, where there is primary care, but really, access to secondary care is a kind of unthinkable 3-day travelling option. And we've got to kind of, roll this back to what actually can be provided locally. And so, for example, I'm not with you this morning due to a sporting injury. And, if I want to take it further, other than, a few non-steroidals and a bit of rest and some ice myself, then I'm going to have to go to somewhere that is based in a hospital. But there's absolutely no credible reason why that should be so. Because it isn't something that a hospital's likely to be able to do anything with more than a primary care setting, unless radiology is required, which it is not. But everything else, including good advice and even the prescription of crutches, is something that actually is only taking me towards a hospital because historically that's where the service is, not because it needs to be. And I think we've just got to kind of unthink that model a bit. Sorry if that was not very lucid for a Tuesday morning, but I'm doing my best. Over.
Just impressed that you've got a sporting injury. I think. Thanks, John. That's very That's very helpful. Thank you. Any other comments, Wendy?
Yeah, well, I have to agree there because it's not a sporting injury, mine's a dog walking injury. And I had the same conversation with John yesterday, because I don't want to go and see the hospital, I don't want to go and see the doctor, I just want a form so I can have my foot x-rayed to make sure that I haven't actually done anything. And getting that form is very difficult, because I was in a queue of 49 yesterday and I gave up, so I'm on ibuprofen, paracetamol and muscle cream in my foot, but it hurts very much. So, and I have to agree with you, I mean, as in my role of adult care at county council, I think that planned care at home for a start, and having elderly parents as well. I don't want them to go to hospital. My mother-in-law over last week I was away, she had a bleed. They wanted to take her to hospital. I said, no, let's find what the bleed is for a start. But no, we insisted taking her to Grantham. She went to Grantham A&E, couldn't do anything with her there because there's no gynaes there. She's 87. Didn't examine her, they sent her home, had another bleed, found out, because her carer found out, it was a little tag on the top of their leg. Why? Why did we not, why did we not just send someone out just to check, the district nurse or somebody just to check? So that lady who's housebound, by the way, as well, so they struggled to get her to hospital. Went to, and I said, for God's sake, do not go any further. But because she's bleeding, we've got the panic. Let's panic for a start, and she might be not. I don't want to deny, but, and that is where we are going wrong. We are taking too many people away when they should be at home.
In my practice, all the real frail elderly have a care coordinator who's a very experienced nurse. And I would like to think in that situation, you would have known the name of my care coordinator. You would have rung her because you'd have had her number and she would have gone out and seen your mum.
We rang the practice.
And that's what should happen.
Yeah, it is. We rang the practice here in Sleaford and they said, no, ring 999. And I'm saying, no, we don't ring 999. And it's not just Sleaford, my parents are in Woodhull. I live on the coast, so we have it all over, but we have to get, our doctors to, we have to get that home service right first.
Yeah.
To stop them getting into hospital, because my argument is, if you're 89, what are they going to do when they get there? What are they going to do with you?
It does mean building up the local community.
Oh, we've got an excellent, if this gentleman here can do it.
It is.
If you can do it, then I think.
I mean, we're fortunate we have some funding to help with the care coordinator. The rest is our own funding. But we are going to need to shift resources significantly from secondary care into community care, and that's not just money. Because actually, if you move, if we can get the resource into community care, we need less bodies, as in staff in hospitals. So the worry is always, well, we won't be able to get the staff to work in community care. Well, we've got the staff. They currently work in the hospital. We need to start moving people as well.
I agree.
It's really helpful. So let's let Sue and Julia, then we'll move on. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman. And it's going back to some of your opening remarks and some very wise words. You intimated it. I think Jonathan actually said it. There is this feeling of a need for a reset. And we just need to be very mindful that we take our public and patients with us on that reset, and that we are doing with rather than doing to people, because if we have the confidence of our residents, then we are a long way along that journey. And absolutely, that is prevention. But we need to put that intelligence, that education, that information there in the first place. I think that's the bit that probably over a period of time, you mentioned it yourself around further education, around schooling, it's getting embedded. We're a very risk averse culture, so we have these issues with ambulances, and we need to have that bit of a reset as far as prevention is concerned. And again, you mentioned culture, we need to have the reasons why I want to hear why we can do something rather than all the reasons why we can't do something. We need to, again, reset that. We're going to do it this way or whatever. And then, as you will be very familiar with by now, you mentioned the letter from, did you say Richard Steddings with was it with 7 thou shouts or whatever? And of course, I will say, well, as long as it works for Lincolnshire, of course we will take note of it. But again, it comes back to what's applicable for us in this area. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
I think really interesting hearing a sort of different model of care, and so many people in secondary care are tired, actually probably are looking at leaving and have left. Actually, is this a way of actually keeping people, moving them into a different role that perhaps actually has a different set of pressures, but something that allows people to move out, get a rest, come back into the workforce, and giving them an opportunity to do different things, even if it's only for a year, to just rebrand themselves, could be a way of actually helping. The issue, of course, is money in all of this. Because actually, I hear what you're saying about moving resources, but secondary care is terribly stretched at the moment, as we keep hearing. So I'm not sure it's about necessarily taking people out. It's actually about getting more people, and this may be a way of actually bringing people back into nursing or whatever. And I don't know whether it would work, but at least it feels it's an opportunity for people. And it's about being flexible in our workforce as well, and allowing people to move from secondary care into primary care, then perhaps back in. We've got to be more flexible about what we do and just take into account where they are in their life.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Yes, good last one.
Sorry, I just wanted to add, it seems like the natural point to mention that we have got a voluntary and community sector. We have got health and care staff in the community already. They're in nursing homes, and that workforce, there's a massive workforce across both those sectors as well, which needs to be included in all these discussions. If we're moving care or talk about moving care back into the community, then there's 2 sectors there that really can play and should be playing a huge part in that, because there's a massive workforce, a lot of skill, a lot of professionalism that can be tapped into and utilised in a much better way.
Couldn't agree with you more. Right at the top of it, that's exactly what I think is right. It's using all the constituent parts in a slightly different way. But, thank you very much indeed for it. But they're the kind of discussions that we've got. I'm going to ask John now to pick up under 2.2 his kind of update, which has been slightly grittier.
Yeah. Thanks. That's been a great conversation. So much to get into. But really have to thank everybody. So I'll just make a few observations from my perspective. Firstly, to say that in the not yet 4 weeks since we last met on the 1st of July, wow, have there been some changes and developments. It's quite unbelievable, really. And when I'm talking to you about what's sort of going on a bit more, everybody in my world, just to ask you to bear in mind just how really busy and pushed, not just our own ICB staff are, but staff across the whole of the wider health and care system in Lincolnshire. It is a pressurised moment for us all. So first thing I just wanted to reflect on that has changed since the 1st of July is the recent awarding, is that the right terminology, of the George Cross to the NHS for the incredible dedication, compassion and skill that the NHS has provided and demonstrated in the country since its inception. Clearly, the pandemic has been hugely significant in relation to all of that. But just to say, obviously, we're all, I hope, very proud to be associated with that. But I have emphasised to colleagues across Lincolnshire, that's us as well. We've all played our part. Everyone who's been involved in the service, just to reflect on that and be proud of it. Clearly, since the 1st of July, we also now have a new Secretary of State and ministerial team. Clearly, we have a Prime Ministerial sort of leadership contest ongoing at the moment, and we all have read at the weekend that Rishi Sunak made observations that he feels the NHS is in an emergency situation at the moment, particularly around waiting. Also, just yesterday, the Health and Care Committees, Jeremy Hunt's committee, was their latest report was the leading item on the BBC in relation to, again, the workforce crisis. I think that it was described. That is so clear and obvious. We have a lot of work to do in Lincolnshire around workforce retention, recruitment, skills, growing our own, the sort of whole piece. And Julie, you mentioned workforce as well as digital, and you will come back to this over time. But it's evident that we need to have this stuff front and centre in our minds. Just as Julie, you said, without workforce, we don't have the service. And I think that when I think about workforce, yes, we've got specific issues within the NHS, which we need to have sort of front and centre. But when you look at the Lincolnshire system as a whole, it's the whole integrated health and care workforce. So it's the social care workforce, it's the care home and domiciliary care workforce, it's a workforce in the voluntary and third sector as well. It is all connected. And I think that there's some great opportunities to work very, very differently in relation to all of that, which we think have a responsibility to seize. Other things that have gone on nationally is to just say a bit more about the recent NHS England announcement about their downsizing by 30 to 40%. Staffing wise, that's about 6,000 or 8,000 posts out of about, it's about 22,000. The whole new combined NHS England started on the 1st of July. It is early days, but I get a sense this one's going to move really quite quickly. I think there will be some significant implications for us. In a nutshell, I think more things will be coming our way than was previously anticipated. So just to emphasise that the things that were already coming our way is responsibility for the pharmacists, optometrists and dentists, which are coming our way from the 1st of April next year. And Sandra is our lead executive in all the details on that. And Sunil is already putting our collective arms around the shoulders of our dentists, optometrists and pharmacists in Lincolnshire in terms of bringing them into the clinical family here. But in addition, we are in anticipation that responsibility for aspects of specialised commissioning, screening and immunisation, and health and justice, prisoner health would be coming our way in subsequent years. I think that those things may come our way sooner rather than later now. But I also think that many other responsibilities that NHS England have, they will be seeking to delegate to ICBs. I mean, Amanda Pritchard pretty much said so in her statement, and I think that we will be asked to step up more than we already were in terms of our responsibilities. I'm also pretty clear that those responsibilities that come our way may be best managed. Some of them may be best managed for the people of Lincolnshire on an East Midlands footprint, because there are many things that are best managed and thought about over a population of 5 million rather than just under 1 million that we have. So in parallel with that, there is a significant piece of development work going on. What some East Midlands footprint would look like. There's a chairs and chief executives group. There's already a lot happening, like, for example, the commissioning of East Midlands Ambulance Service and 111, academic health science networks, and a whole lot of clinical networks already on that. I think that whole East Midlands thing will rapidly evolve. So we need to see where all of that goes. I've also been clear with our team that we do work hand in glove with colleagues at NHS England. By and large, that is a really constructive, good relationship. We need to have in mind that people at NHS England, just like us, are people trying to do their level best for the NHS and patient care, and that we work closely with them and extend a bit of sort of kind thought to the change they will be going through. And then the sort of final thing I want to say about nationally is clearly the NHS pay awards came out last week. You'll all have read the national commentary, media commentary about that, and you'll have your own view on that too, no doubt. Clearly, we're waiting now for the specific details to come through so we can actually activate, the pay increase and backdate it for our staff and all of that. Matt is continuing to work really closely with the national and regional team in terms of, the implications financially of that and how we can do our best to ensure that the commitment that it is funded from additional non-ICB resources is met. But alongside of that, there was also a significant announcement about reducing local and agency costs, and Lincolnshire, by somewhere north of 40 million in terms of our annual agency and local costs, which in itself is an indicator of the challenges we've got around the workforce. So again, we've got work to do in relation to all of that. So that's sort of nationally. Locally, Claire will no doubt reflect on these points, but operationally it has been very, very challenging. Clearly we've had the heat wave last week, which didn't help. I cannot tell you how intensive the work that was required to be done in terms of the planning, monitoring and dealing with any consequences of that was. And it's the NHS Lincolnshire team in the round, not just the ICB, had to quite understandably go into overdrive on that, along with our colleagues in public health and across the county. I must say there's some brilliant work done in Lincolnshire. It's a superb team effort. A lot of people put their shoulder to the wheel. I just want to pay tribute, particularly to some of the sort of technology and the estates staff that the trusts have across the trusts. I think it's fair to say that ULHT were really quite challenged, and they were superb in their response. Also, ambulance handovers and emergency care. We've already discussed that. Huge pressure, and new Secretary of State is very interested in that. Electives, that's how long people have been waiting. We're in a really smart, good position on that, and there's some success there to celebrate, notwithstanding how much further we have to go with that. And as Claire will talk about, there's some really, really good stuff going on, but the numbers aren't always where we would want them to be. Andrew, you've already mentioned the excellent meeting with NHS England last week in terms of the ULHT sort of out of special measures meeting. I think it's important to note that the mood music of that meeting was very supportive around the system and everything that we're doing. So, for example, relationships with local government, which we've noted as a strong feature of Lincolnshire. But equally, we were in the right way left in no doubt that we all understand we have some way to go in terms of the system as a whole. Other few final points to note is to share with the board that there's been a lot of conversation nationally and locally in the media about community diagnostic centres. We do have our first one already well established in Grantham, working really, really well. We as an ICB were asked by NHS England to put forward a proposal for where we want our second community diagnostic centre to be. And Claire's led the work with the team, including ULHT colleagues and others, in relation to all of that. So we have come to a third position that it will be based in Boston sort of hub and spoke arrangement, definitely with Skegness and Mablethorpe, potentially with Spalding as well. But just to say, whilst we've come to that as our preferred position, there's a whole business case and long bit of process to go through, so that is far from certain or secure. But given how much chatter there's been about this, I just wanted to share with the board what our thinking is, and obviously we'll keep the board up to date in the months ahead in terms of how that process moves forward. The local medical committee had a brilliant evening week before last. It was a recognition and reflection event at the showground, best part of 400 people. Just really the opportunity to say thank you to primary care across the county for their excellent work that they did. I was there and just said a few words, as indeed did Jonathan and Dean. You were there, slightly different guys as well. But I just wanted to share with everybody that it was a really I think moving and appropriate reflection event. And finally, to say that we have received a question from a member of the public, a lady called Jodie Clark, and as she's not listening live, nobody is, but Jodie, I hope we'll be able to pick up the feed later in the day. So Jodie, thanks for your question. The question was in relation to when we think that the 24/7 urgent treatment centre at Grantham will be able to be mobilised and operational. So just to share with the board that under the CCG, over a number of years, we have conducted a really sort of deep exercise called the Acute Services Review in terms of the best structure going forward for some of our secondary care services. And the CCG made some decisions in relation to that in May, please. Thank you. The 4 services concerned was stroke, orthopaedics, medical bed services at Grantham Hospital, and Grantham A&E stroke urgent treatment centre. So in relation to Grantham A&E urgent treatment centre, the CCG, following a very comprehensive exercise over a period of time, came to the decision that the current restricted A&E service should be transformed into a 24/7 urgent treatment centre. Dave is listing clinical experts on all of this. So that decision was made in May. Obviously, we're really keen to enact those decisions just as soon as we possibly can. So what I'll be able to say to Jodie is that we all want to implement that change as quickly as we can now. We've made the decision on the basis that it's very clearly the right way forward for healthcare in Grantham. So clearly, we're now agitated to put that better solution in place. We do have to go through, as I'm sure, some due process in relation to this, in terms of sort of procurement and a whole range of other bits as well to make this permanent change and ensure it's properly established and put in place for the long term. So that is not a quick and easy task. So I wouldn't want to create the impression that will be done and dusted, in the very short term. I think it's probably unwise to be too specific about where, when it will be fully sort of operationalised and mobilised. I think it's fair to say, Pete, it will be probably in calendar year 2023. Certainly, we hope the first half of 2023 and as early as possible in 2023. And obviously, Andrew, we'll be able to provide the board with more briefing about that once we're clearer on all the process that we need to attend to. So I hope that's helpful for the board, and I hope that answers your question, Jodie. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you very much. So let's kick off any questions from the board. Yes.
Process. I picked up on the diagnostic section you just picked it up. How do we cut through some of the red tape and do things more quickly, because we know we need to do these things. If we need to find a way of doing them more quickly, perhaps taking a bit of a risk. I think we picked it up on the PCC committee. We need at times to take risk if it's in the best interest of patients, and that's what we're doing. So how do we do it more quickly?
I think Jonathan's steer earlier was quite helpful. You know, it's almost that wisdom prayer, isn't it? You know, change the things you can't, you can change, and you know, don't put your energies in the things that you can't. So there's a huge amount that we can change and mobilised on a almost a daily basis, I think it's fair to say. So I don't want the board to have the impression that we're not continually innovating, adapting, changing in a very, very flexible way. Our services are almost day in, day out. Clearly, in relation to the Community Diagnostic Centre, we are in a national process in relation to that, and a lot of resource, financial resource, as well as other sort of resources is required for that. So we do have to respect that, and clearly need to go through that safely and legally and sensibly. And in terms of the changes of Grantham and indeed the other changes, it is a very big deal when the CCG, potentially the ICB in the future, decides to make a permanent change to the configuration of services. So that does understandably have to be a very, very significant process behind that. I think the point that I was really making is that on all four of those changes, we are very agitated to move on as quickly as we can and get them in place. Some of them actually, like for example, the orthopaedics, there's already a well-established pilot which looks very similar to the permanent change that we want to make. So that is going to be, I think Peter's fair to say, fairly straightforward change. But because you know, we have to respect, don't we, the legislation around procurement and all of that, and do that properly. So I'll keep you up to date, but clearly, you know, something you can twist on, and some things you just have to stick on, given the process that we're part of.
I mean, it's a very good challenge, isn't it? I mean, those four things you talked about are big, huge changes, but we do need to test ourselves about what are the things we can speed up. What are other things that are not in our that need proper processing? We've got to accept that there'll be a number of things that proper processing. Martin, Martin can come in.
Yeah, no, it's a fairly quick comment. John, I think it's that point about, and I just want to kind of log the potential opportunity available to us with the services coming from NHS England. If I just group them all as the NHSE services, because we're trying to integrate pathways, we're trying to think differently. We'll now have an opportunity. And I think Andrew's your point about Lincolnising them to some extent, isn't it? Because a lot of those are contracted and commissioned centrally for us, isn't it? They're not necessarily, some of them are a bit one size fits all model, which broadly fits what is a really big geography, West and the East Midlands, because it's done in the whole Midlands footprint at the moment. So I just wanted to flag, because there's great opportunity there. It'll bring a lot of challenge, because we'll have to start thinking about services that currently someone else has commissioned on our behalf. And equally, we'll have to pick up the old quality and oversight. But there's a great opportunity there to integrate them into our current pathways. And that stretch that was made a little bit earlier, actually, we don't need to necessarily recommission them in exactly the same way they were before. There's an opportunity to localise them.
Yeah, Julie, I was just going to say part of, in relation to community diagnostic centres is a really good example. So whilst we're part of a national programme and we've got to put in bids to access the allocation that we've got, that doesn't stop us changing diagnostics that's already within our gift. And also we know there will be some big programmes in other parts of the region that don't go ahead in quite the timely manner that those systems would have wanted them to. So there will be slippage. So we've already put in an opportunity through to NHSE to say, if that happens and that is the case, we could start some of those spokes. So Jackie, who you'll hear from later, is already trying to see whether we could
start a service in Skegness, for example, I don't know, there's a need ahead of the hub starting, which isn't really strictly how we should do it, but just to assure you that we do take those opportunities where we can.
Thank you very much indeed. Jonathan, Dawn, then Matt.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to expand on the point from the previous remarks about speeding things up and risk, because this did come up at the primary care committee. And I think the point I was trying to articulate was that there are some kinds of risk that we can't take. For example, clinical safety or clinical quality risk. There are other kinds of risk we can't take because if we do, it breaks the law, for example, procurement law and so forth, which I'm clearly not an expert on. But there are kind of bits in the middle which are around possibilities, but relatively remote, of, for example, legal challenge on a particular point. And here I feel that the mindset may be too far towards we want to ensure against any legal challenge before we move, versus actually the interests of patients and the public health is so paramount, we will move and absorb an amount of possible legal risks. And I think that's that kind of balance in the middle is probably the ground we can close up on moving faster. Over.
If you want to say anything, just wave. So, which is great. Dawn.
Question. Choose thing. Important. And we position those in a structure with providers. Intrigued as to what is ICB. We keep real record. In the workforce, but also the digital. They're big things and massively everything we're doing. And how will we keep a really good grip? Maybe I want to return to the government section. Governance point of view, because they're not sitting with the committees that such they're sitting with providers, and I just worry that they're so stretched in their difficult for us to keep up with. So it's okay.
Let's take a few comments and Matt.
Yeah, I suppose going back to Julie's point, what I think you're getting at is pace with an understanding of the risk profile and ensuring that we all understand how we allocate resources and with what, and to take Dawn's point, and we've got an understanding how we gain assurance over the disbursement of them. I think what I'd say, the first point is that we've got a very mixed partnership group, and my own perspective is that there is a very different risk appetite between the different partners. The main partners I'm talking about, the trust and the trust boards, and the boards themselves are amalgams of like this. In fact, Pete Moore and I did an exercise about 5 months ago, and we took the board assurance frameworks of the 4 partner organisations. We did a bit of comparison, and there are a lot of similarities, but there are also some quite big variations. And I think it will be that would be one of the big challenges for us to. So how do we meaningfully draw our risk profile and sort of reduce the tail, as it were, on that? As to the sort of the other points around allocation resources, I think we've just signalled 2 very significant changes, one of which we've worked through and one of which we are just about to implement, which help in that area. The first is that understanding and knowing how to resolve problems that have come to light. So your correction of errors for an initiative. And we've enacted and just concluded a piece of work around the Lincolnshire Risk Gain Chair, which is essentially saying any partner can flag a problem with an initiative that we understood we would change the nature of services. And then we are contractually committed to within a 20-day period arriving at a resolution. And we've just done that with the sort of flagship Care Close to Home initiative, which was launched last year. And we have agreed resources, and actually we have taken a risk in the allocation of those resources. And the second is what's referred to as the investment panel, also known as the double lock, which I'll say a little bit more about a little later. But it's essentially saying there's a place where you can go to get resources allocated in schemes, and the system is behind that. So that's, I think, a useful initiative that will help us. And that's not just ICB resources that it's got calls on, but also partner resources and partner investment decisions.
Thanks, partner. Really helpful. Can I go back to John, and then we'll wrap this bit up. Yeah.
Yeah, great question, Dawn. I think there's a number of things in relation to both digital and workforce. Just to sort of say, the first thing is, in both areas, there's a huge amount of really great work going on. So, we've known about these challenges for a number of years, and I think it'd be a great opportunity at some point just to have a bit of a briefing session on what we've done, where we are, as well as obviously describing some of the challenges which clearly are present and remain. So something about visibility. There's something about what I would call capital G governance, which is how we and the trust boards and others have that, if you like, that non-executive type oversight and challenge function in terms of where we are on both. And I think there's some small g issues as well, small g governance issues in terms of who's authorised to do what and when that we need to address. Also, just to sort of share with you that we are having a bit of a stock take of where we are with the collaborative at the moment. It's come a long way in a very short period of time. I think the fundamental question in my mind is whether we just need to think again about digital and workforce in terms of how we want to sort of governance and position this in our system. One of the points being that the amount of work that the collaborative has on in terms of recovery support, getting out soft board, discharge and flow, care close to home, and all of that, which is really, really important. On reflection, we can put in place other arrangements in relation to digital workforce that may ease the burden a bit on the collaborative and enable them to succeed earlier than the things that we all need to succeed on early. So that is a piece of work that's just currently underway, Dawn.
It's a bit like John, at your point, Andrew, about, the urgency crowd and being important, and it is about not losing this because we're so busy firefighting at the front.
Okay, well, thanks very much indeed, John. Obviously, there's lots of opportunities coming up, not least the delegation of additional resources from March next year, April next year, dentists, etc. I think in terms of pace on process, it divides into two. We've had a good debate about that. Things that we are in control of as a Lincolnshire system, all of us, and things that we've got to be really mindful of in terms of clinical safety, due process, fibre national, all those sorts of things. So they divide, but where we can improve pace, we can. I think just picking up what you said, Mark, I was very struck with the gain share type. That's something agreed by all the partners about how we can pick up the pace on things that we're in charge of. So I think that's a really good point. And then finally on the provider collaborative, yes, at the moment, I think we'll have workforce digital transformation delegated, as it were, or agreed amongst us all that it is with the provider collaborative. But I think we're just going to take a look at form and function and make sure that that's the correct place for it to be with all the partners. All the partners agree it. And I think you've indicated all the partners are taking a look at that. So, thank you very much indeed. I'm glad we built in a bit of slack to this agenda, but it's been a really useful debate. So we're going to move now into item 3 and a couple of key updates. And we'll start off with Andy, public health key update.
Very much. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a few of the key public health issues. Obviously, you won't be surprised to see me leading up with COVID-19. Where we are with COVID, well, in the last 7 days, we've seen 1,300 positive cases in Lincolnshire. Of those just we know about, we'll be aware that changing in testing policy means that we see a fraction of the cases in Lincolnshire coming through and positive now. But importantly, we do have a view from ONS data, etc., about the overall trend. And indeed, in terms of positivity, in terms of total tests as well, and we are starting to see locally and nationally, I think, signs of a plateau. Now, we are still seeing numbers increase, I think, nationally, but in Lincolnshire, the test information and positivity information that we've got suggests that we started to see signs of a plateau in the first sort of 3rd of July, and that has levelled off through July, and just starting to see at about the limit of our sort of data that we have confidence in, first signs of a decrease in the number of positive cases coming through. So that would be that's encouraging. Obviously, indeed, yeah. Fingers crossed. We know that we've seen many waves, and this pattern isn't likely to change anytime soon, I would suggest. So we are expecting further waves probably in the autumn. We know what I'd say on COVID as well is in terms of the variants that we've got. We don't get a lot of typing in Lincolnshire. I think in the last 7 days we've only had 50 cases typed, but the majority, 84% or so, were the BA5 version of Omicron. So this wave has been the case nationally, driven by the newer variants of Omicron that we've seen. And we hope now, obviously, to see that those signs of a decrease solidify. We know that the numbers in hospitals over the last week, you know, when people will have their fingers on the pulse here, have started to come down in terms of testing positive there. Obviously, the number of patients in ICU has been low through this wave, which again is encouraging. So that's the picture with COVID. Obviously, we've got planning for the autumn vaccination programme, and you'll be aware that JCVI have published final recommendations on the COVID-19 booster programme, and so we've got that cohort defined. What I would say, whilst we're on the subject of vaccinations, JCVI have released a flu letter 22 as well. So we know the eligible cohorts are different from previous years, and those aged 50 to 64 will still be eligible under the NHS programme, but frontline social care staff will not. So that's some changes to previous years. And whilst we're on the subject of flu, I am sure there is indications of a significant and early flu wave in the Southern Hemisphere. So whilst we have obviously Sir Johnson on the call, one of his areas of expertise, but we perhaps would expect to see a similar picture in the UK, in the Northern Hemisphere. And although we've been talking about it as one of our key critical risks for the last few years, we do see a significant surge in flu infections. Well, we're due one, put it that way, and we haven't seen it yet. So it would be reasonable to plan for that this autumn and winter very clearly. The other key issue I just want to flag up very quickly is monkeypox. People be aware that the number of cases are increasing. There's well over 2,000 cases in the UK now, over 2,000 in England. And we have seen a change to the case definition on this, just published today. I got that through actually this morning. So we are again, you know, and again, UXA are looking at the guidance for that. So they've close contacts, confirmed case guidance been updated as well. And we know that there's research going into the modes of transmission, because we know obviously there's risk groups around men who have sex with men, and indeed many sexual partners. There does seem to be that pattern there as well. I wouldn't say we're seeing significant numbers of Lincolnshire. We know the numbers are very small. Nonetheless, it is significant health risk to just flag up. So I've mentioned that. I've mentioned vaccination planning for the autumn. I will probably leave it there and to take any questions, of course.
Thank you, Andy. That's really helpful. Thank you. Questions on that update from Andy? No. Thank you very much. Okay. 3.2 update on Health Watch B.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, just to clarify, obviously, John mentioned that I was in a different guise at the LMC conference. I was there as a magician, mind reader, and host for the event. But today, I'm here as a sort of contract manager of health and Lincolnshire. Just to clarify that.
I was going to make a quip on that, but I thought I better not because you may not want to. But yeah,
It's a fun part of the job.
brilliant.
That's the fun part. Yeah, obviously Health Watch, hearing from the patients themselves. And yeah, you won't be surprised by, a couple of the sort of main themes that I've sort of talked about. And the first one is around dental services, and people are coming to us with real challenges and issues around access to dentists. And I know that might be slightly out of the gift of the ICB currently, but I think it's obviously worth mentioning because I don't know what data is out there that evidence of effect on other services because of that access issue. Obviously, clearly there's inequality around access, but also from a public health point of view, obviously the prevention side of things, and also the fluoride in water is also been a big issue for Lincolnshire and some of the east area. So that's one big, and I don't know if we want to pause and sort of discuss any of that and sort of where we.
I did the whole get on report.
Yeah, that's fine.
All the way through and we'll pick up. Yeah.
Yeah, and I suppose some positive news around NHS dentistry is around the NHS sort of increase some of the payments around dentist treatments and things. And I don't know what effect that's going to have in Lincolnshire, but it'd be good to sort of see that from a patient's point of view. What a difference that's going to make. The other sort of big issue that I was going to mention as well is that we are starting to hear a lot of empowering experiences of people going into hospital and A&E and what they're experiencing there with regards to long waits, what they're actually seeing, with people obviously sitting in corridors and in chairs for long periods of time, and people being sick and in swaddled clothes and some of those communication issues and things that we've heard about. So I think that just gives a bit of context to maybe some of the numbers that we're going to hear a bit later around some of those A&E weights and things like that. The other bit was around overall communication, especially around between hospitals and GPs, and I think there's something around what the sort of the ICB is going to do around communication as a whole, but also something we talked about cultural changes earlier on around how we can bring the patients along with that and making sure that they are aware of the new ways of accessing services, and just sort of bringing them along and that cultural change around expectations as well. It would be interesting to see how the ICB are going to sort of deal with that. And I think from a Health Watch point of view, we're in an interesting time at the moment. Our contract runs from sort of October to the following September, so we are doing some sort of annual planning at the moment, and that gives the ICB an opportunity to kind of influence some of those areas that we might particularly look at. At the moment, we've got sort of in pencil at the moment is sort of around children and young people, particularly around mental health, self-harm, social care. Obviously, big area that we tend to, and this is nationally as well, struggle to gather the experiences of people with social care because they are concerned that there might be repercussions to them, giving their experiences. So that's an area that we want to particularly focus on as well. We're working with Lincolnshire County Council, with that and adult social care, as well as sort of working with LPFT around mental health more generally, but about the experiences people are having while they're waiting for clinical interventions and things like that. So that's what we've got, and that's, as I say, there's an opportunity there to kind of influence some of our work and how we can bring it into the integrated care. Yeah, I'll leave it.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed. That's a really, really helpful report. Anybody want to pick up any of those 4 points that you raised, please?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I think there's definitely something similar. I've talked about this in terms of the risk summit that we're doing around urgent emergency care that we talked about earlier. And just to review really generally about trying to engage with the public about why they access services in the way they do. And we've heard some examples today, haven't we, of why people do. I think we tend to try and direct people to where we want them to go, whether that's for social care or for healthcare, rather than really understand why people behave in the way that they do. So I think that work that we need to do around engagement with them, around what they need and how we can best meet that need, but also about how their experience and services is really important to help us with the design. And you're absolutely right, we can't sit in a dark room and design that for them. We've got to work with the public, but also set some expectations within that as well, that we won't serve all of these immediately. We won't be able to put everything everywhere, but we certainly need to do better at that. So I think working with you around how we do some of that engagement work would be really.
Just so I understand, when you, that fourth point you said about the contracts and all this.
Yes, yeah.
What you're meaning is that you're going to be looking in particular at mental health children.
Yes,
that's what you mean.
Yeah, setting our priorities for the kind of year. We'll do, be some research, a bit of project work around that particular theme as well. So,
okay.
Chair.
John. Sarah, yes, sorry, Sarah.
That's okay, thank you. Just to add a bit of context to that piece of work. So LPFT and local authority are leading a joint piece of children and young people's transformation work over the next 12 months. We're in that sort of consultation and engagement process at the minute, and liaising with Health Watch as part of that. So we'll be able to feedback on traction, but we're just at the information gathering stage at the minute. But one area where we don't have strength in Lincolnshire, I think, is around community assets for children and young people. I think we've made great strides around adult and older adult, but children and young people, it's definitely a bit of a gap. Thank you.
So, shall I pick up the dentists as well? Just to quickly say for the board, clearly, there'll be plenty of opportunities for briefing on this. In terms of general dental services, access to general dental services, and all of that, Dean's spot on. We have some very, very significant challenges in Lincolnshire. In the Midlands region, where we are regarded as one of the 2 of the 11 systems that are most concerned with. And actually within Lincolnshire, there's also significant variation. So surprise, the further east you go in the county, the more challenging that is on all fronts. Fluoride in the water, access to your GP, children's dental health, the whole lot. Now, Sandra and I have been working really closely with the regional dentist and his team and colleagues in relation to, there's a whole, again, you would understand that people don't just sort of sit back and say, that's that, isn't it? So there's a lot of work going on, ranging from there is renegotiation of the national contract going on. There's a lot of regional initiatives pointing particularly Lincolnshire going on. So, for example, there's a sort of go and hello approach, which I'm led to believe from the discussion just last week is looking surprisingly very promising at the moment for Lincolnshire. And I've essentially commissioned the regional team work with Sandra and our team to come up with a clear, if you like, strategy in terms of where we want to be going in Lincolnshire over the next few years. I think so 3 years since I signed in terms of how we get from where we are now to where we want to be, and to make sure that we have clarity for the board in terms of what all the issues are, how long standing are, what the data looks like, all the things that are in play at the moment, and where we go further with that. And I just make the point, it comes back to something Martin said, which I think Sonil, I know has got very much in his mind as well, but the opportunities of integrating with dental services are all over the place. So really, really significant ones about how we can improve things, both in terms of population health and in terms of service provision. And again, once you get into people know about this and talk to you about the opportunities, you think, wow, there's a hell of a lot of really, really good stuff that's just waiting for us to engage with and make it happen. So there's a lot of I think pathway redesign work available as well as the public health stuff. So perhaps we'll come back to that just to say, I think I've heard Dean from Sarah in the past that 80% of all complaints that are raised with health boards in Lincolnshire are in relation to dental services. So it's mega, it is mega. But equally, again, just to assure you, there's a lot of work going on, and we'll do a further briefing on that. Can we just deal with the comms and engagement?
Just before we do, let's just bring Andy in
I
on
just want to say to the board very quickly, just to be aware in the context of fluoridation, there's been some media interest really because it recently around fluoridation, because it has become widely known that through 24 and 25 we'll actually all of the fluoridation in Lincolnshire and the water supply across the entire county during major infrastructure works. There's legal issues around that, in that they cannot add fluoridation to areas without a new legal agreement, but they can remove it legally for infrastructure works. And there are major works required in 24 and 25 which will require restructuring flow of water around the county. The only option any water have is to remove fluoridation from all of the county's water supply during that period of time.
Wow, I didn't know.
Yeah, and broadly at the moment, the west half of the county, broadly.
I should have made that point very clear. Sorry. Yes, currently the west half of the county gets fluoridated water in general. The east half does not. And the differences, particularly in children's health around caries and rates of caries between the east and the west, is incredibly stark. And it would be a priority for us under the new legislation for to see if there is any appetite for the Secretary of State to consider changes to fluoridation, but as I understand it, obviously the situation is very much in flux. There'll be no certainty or clarity over that. Expect any concern.
Right, thanks, Andy. Okay. Communication.
I think we need to have this conversation again. We have a deeper look at this, but just bear in mind Sue's comments from earlier about how we need to do things with people of Lincolnshire and not lots to. Like with so many things, Dawn, there's already a lot of really great stuff that's happening. So we're not starting from scratch here. When I sort of set out my ambition for OS, I did say that I think there are three constituencies that we need to pay real attention to and stimulate to enable us to really succeed in do what we need to do. The first is around our clinicians across the county and clinical voice. The second is how we have the relationship with all of our partners, like you said at the beginning, Andrew. And third, and arguably the most important one, is the relationship we want to have with the people of Lincolnshire about their health as well as their NHS services. There is a work going on at the moment that I think will come forward to the board in due course, which will create a frame for a big macro public engagement exercise that under the ICB stroke Health and Wellbeing Board we envisage undertaking in the next calendar year in relation to updating the health and wellbeing strategy for Lincolnshire. That last happened about 5 or 6 years ago. It was part of an 18-month exercise through to some very bespoke personalisation work that we, our colleagues in the County Council and the third sector are doing about how we design services, specific services around the needs of specific patients and their families. That's a very sort of micro thing, and there's the vast amount of stuff in the middle, not least, for example, the role Health Watch play. At the moment, we do not have a frame within which all of that work can be taken forward or articulated, and we can have a strategic look at. So Glenn Garrett, who's the Director of Adult Social Care and Public Health, and I have commissioned a piece of work from our joint teams in relation to that. So I think over the course of the next few months, Dawn, that will come forward, and obviously we will see where that takes us. So that's how we do it with people at a very local level. as well as across the county. But I would hope it's that we as we debate need to know that whether an individual patient is engaging with an individual healthcare professional, or we as the ICB are engaging with communities across the whole of Lincolnshire, that we are doing so in a way which is designed around the needs of the patients and their families and our communities, not around our perception needs. So again, that's another one, Andrew, that we will come back to, telling people what they shouldn't do in relation to, for example, A&E services. We've got a long track record of that clearly not being the most appropriate way to deal with it. Personally, I think that people, when they are both stressed and distressed, which is what they tend to be when they're seeking urgent care, do what is the easiest thing. And we don't always make the easiest thing for them the right thing for them. And that's a fundamental part of the transformation we need to do.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much indeed, Dean, for that update. I'm going to move us on to 4.1 and then we'll take a break. So let's, we've been talking about it, health inequalities approach. Sandra, over to you.
Oh, thank you, Chair. So what you've got within your papers is that we'd helpfully just provide a bit of a background to some of the work that we've been doing on health inequalities. So what you've received is an update basically on the progress that we've made on health inequalities so far, but also then outlining the approach that we've been taking and intend to continue to develop as part of the ICB. Some context basically is nationally NHS helpfully did outline an approach for tackling health inequalities, which in the paper is called Core 20+5. So you will hear that referenced quite a lot through this paper, but also if a useful infographic for those of you is detailed within the appendix. I'm not intending to go through the detail of the appendix, but it's there for your information of some of the work that sits behind the work that we've done in Lincolnshire around that Core 20+5. And what Core 20+5 is around is a framework support action, specifically looking at the Core 20 is the 20% most deprived in our county in Lincolnshire. That's defined by the indices of multiple deprivation. And the plus element is for an ICS themselves to identify, is there any other population group that we would see have a less than average in outcomes or experience or access to some of the care that's received. The 5 areas then are given some clinical focus, so where targeted action is needed in terms of addressing health inequalities on a national level, but actually back to the point about Lincolnshire level, that really fits neatly with what was already identified in our health and wellbeing board strategy and the JSMA and our global burden of disease in them 5 areas. So it's something that's made sense for Lincolnshire too. So just building on that context is that we in Lincolnshire have a really strong track record of joint partnership working between the NHS, County Council and all of the partners. And obviously through that we've got strong collaboratives that have been formed and are still forming, mostly built on the back of the work, excellent work that's been done through COVID-19. And that pandemic meant that we had an opportunity and have used that opportunity to do things differently and start to really tackle health inequalities at a not local level. So probably should just say as well that this has been probably a heightened programme, if you like, in the last 18-24 months. We were sponsored by the Director of Public Health, everybody who could be with us today, and also the ICB Chief Exec previously, the CTG Chief Exec with John Turner. And that was for myself and Andy Fox, who's joining us today, to basically within the Health Inequality Improvement Team and the Public Health Team, do a joint programme of work on health inequalities. And that's what you've received really in terms of the paper. We established in that period a framework for action that we'd start to be able to deliver against those things and basically make sure that it's central to the design into future services and how we start embedding health inequalities in the principle of all of the work we're doing and making sure that we're taking action to improve those who have the worst outcomes the fastest. Really was what was driving behind that
framework for action. You will have seen in the paper, the background paper, that we probably do, when we're talking about outcomes, we are talking about improving where them inequalities are existing in terms of looking at the healthy life expectancy. Some of the information you will see in the background, and we'll have a deeper session, other sessions with Derek as well, in terms of that healthy life expectancy. Meant for Lincolnshire, we've got about a 20 years gap, and that's really where some of the focus is looking at in terms of our 2 ICS key purposes about improving population health as well as tackling health inequalities. So hopefully the appendix that's details for the year-end report. We're happy to take questions outside the meeting. That's really for your background. But equally, it just showing that we've got a great foundation that we're building on the work. So there's lots of building blocks that have now been put in place, and it's how now we accelerate on some of those improvements, mostly in those clinical areas that have been identified through the core 20+5. In terms of the framework for action, and when we start to look at how we're going to do it, we are looking at 3 dimensions. So we are making sure that we are very importantly looking at the access to our services, and we've just heard from Dean in terms of an example given to some dental and other services. So we will always continue to look at how we're improving access to services, and more importantly making it as easy for people to access the right care at the right time. But then more importantly, keeping a focus on the prevention work, which is about looking at those opportunities, which are looking at the healthy diet, the smoking, physical activity, and part of our broader prevention programme, alongside then the wider determinants work. So it's making sure those three focus are still in all the work we do on inequalities, and that will require all organisations working together and all partners working together, but more importantly with the communities and the patient and public engagement that we've just touched on. So taking that whole system approach, we've really, given the earlier conversation, is started to structure the work between what we want to focus on in a strategic approach, which does look at more of the wider determinants areas and some of the opportunities for wider pathway commission between the NHS and other partners. Examples around housing have come up in terms of linked to the clinical work on respiratory, for example, and linked to good housing, and certainly in the news around the fuel poverty. But then when we start to look at our tactical approach, that's much more about that prevention and proactive space, and really building on that care closer to home and bringing some of that much more forward about how we start to focus on them inequality population groups or some of the areas in our county. And then we do have an operational approach. That's mostly about making sure that when we're looking at frontline service changes, that we're thinking about health inequalities in the design of those services and the access to them services, and being very mindful of the differences of our population between coastal, rural and urban. So those communities need to access services in a different way. So we will look in those 3 lenses in terms of the framework, and you then, without going into much more detail given time, we've just given a flavour within the work streams about how we'll start to do that during 22-23 to be able to tackle that. Very much this programme sits alongside everything everybody is doing. And there's been latterly a lot of areas that just recently talking about how do we bring some of the opportunities into the clinical and care directorate. And actually it does build on what Martin was talking about in terms of our future commissioning around screening of services. That actually one of the pathways from an outcome is around colorectal cancer. So if we started to look at that now, we'll do that through the clinical and care directorate to say, what would that look like with the opportunity of screening, which will be part of the ICB? What does it look like in terms of the pathway, and importantly about the health inequality? So we're taking that concept and testing it now before in April when we'll be doing some of that joined up commissioning. So there's some real great examples of some of the work that we're trying to look at a different lens and a much more pathway strategic approach. So I hope that's helpful. I appreciate that we would need a much more deeper development session. It's a very big topic, and I'm sure Andy might want to just add too. But we would look forward to having a much more deeper session in our development time, certainly going through some of these sections, so giving you a bit of a potted history
of the journey, and there's a lot that's been happening in this space, and you will see it in all of the programme updates. There's always a mention of the work that's been doing on health inequalities. So, Andy, is there anything I've missed that you would like to add?
That's okay.
Yeah, please,
Yeah, I mean, what I'd like to say very simply is that this is incredibly important work for several reasons. Firstly, it's the right thing to do. Not to sound too much like Professor Michael Marmot, but health inequalities are unjust and preventable. So it very much, and we have a legal duty as an ICB. Derek has a legal duty, Director of Public Health, to try and address these. NHS England has a legal duty to address them. So it's written into the Constitution, it's written into the law. So it's the right thing to do. But also it frames the opportunity. We've been talking about the challenge to address the things that you can actually change. Now, the challenge around health inequalities is not conceptually difficult. It's not an intellectual challenge. We could all fix health inequalities if we could change the way that everybody's lifestyle operates and works in terms of resource and time, employment, housing that they have. So it's not the challenge. The challenge isn't to think about what is the fundamental issue. The challenge is to do something to operationalise that and to address that. And very clearly for the ICB, one of the single greatest health equity promoting things you could have in your country is a free at point of care universal healthcare system. So the NHS itself is a massive break on inequalities and outcomes, but obviously we are still left with residual inequalities. So fundamentally, the 20-year difference in healthy life expectancy gap gives us that opportunity. It says, if people do interact with our health services and do adopt lifestyles that are health promoting, they could live the next 20 years in good health. How can we change the way our service, and it's not just NHS services, it's public sector services, it's BCS, operate in order to change the way that people interact with them? So the focus comes very clearly onto looking at inequalities in uptake of the care services that we offer, particularly proactive and preventative care, because we know that people from the lower socioeconomic groups they will wait until it's an emergency, and then they will do what's easiest, which is, John said, is go to Edmonton emergency care. Whereas people who have more time, resource, more energy will take up any offer of care you offer them. So those are the levers that the ICB has to put: proactive and preventative care. And if you change the way those services interact with people, change, as John indicated, the way that people's relationship, people's level of trust in the groups that typically don't tend to take up those services, you can start to release some of that benefit, that 20-year difference in health life expectancy. So it frames the opportunity, it frames the challenge, but it focuses very much down in, okay, we can't change the distribution of wealth and housing in Lincolnshire overnight. We can change the way our services interact with the population, so let's do something about it. That's the programme of work in my 2 minutes on.
Yeah. Sarah, would you like to come in?
Thank you. It was just, we've talked a lot about access of services, and I think there's another important element, which is the experience and outcomes and inequalities of those two aspects. This, something that myself and Sandra have talked about in terms of one of the key priorities of the Mental Health, Learning Disabilities and Autism Alliance is to have a mental health, learning disability and autism informed society and informed workforce, because of a lot of the inequalities in terms of outcomes relates to lack of reasonable adjustments, people not understanding mental health capacity, for example, incorrectly applied do not resuscitate orders. So I think there's a lot that we can do, back to our earlier point about moving swiftly with the things that we can change. I think there's a lot of work that we can do across all providers to reduce inequalities in those health outcomes. Thank you.
Could you tell us what we need to do? Make very complicated things simple, but almost what you get most.
I feel I could.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I think we focus on addressing some of the key inequalities in certain high priority areas. Hypertension is one that we're looking at, and we've mentioned colorectal. These are smoking is obviously smoking. There is work streams going on all of these. I will flag up childhood obesity. We've got a new service starting up in those. So what we haven't done is, I think Sandra's working on a plan on the page.
Yes, I am,
to,
yeah.
do that and to frame that narrative really quickly and simply. But yeah, in essence, it's about what can we do, what can we actually change in our service delivery, and then what's the best evidence to how to improve outcomes. Linkagerising it, very key. And actually, we are starting to have early discussions around how best to work together across the ICS, the local authority, maybe even involving academic partners as well, in order to do some specific work on what this stuff looks like in Lincolnshire. Very simply, because community engagement is.
So in practical terms, the integrated care partnership will need to produce a plan by December, which picks up all the, there's only so many things we can do, which will then have that will be a plan for us for 5 years that we will review every year, but that's the practical, that's our roadmap then, isn't it? So on that.
And that will be part of we'll have a health inequality strategy for the ICS that will underpin that work.
Yeah.
And as Andy was just saying, we're trying to articulate on a plan on a page what that looks like as a 5-year.
That's great.
Five-year
That's
roadmap.
great. That's great. So, yeah.
I think there's wider strategy, but I'm very keen, the core 20+5, we have to focus on a specific, measurable and actionable. No point saying, why determined, we all know that, but we're not turning thankful, we're not boiling the ocean. But for us, the clinical director, your numbers will come up in September, hypertension. But we have to make sure we don't increase that inequality by doing that. It's going to be targeted at the levels of the people who would not normally check their numbers. As the second one is colorectal cancer. We are going to look very closely, measurable outputs of improving uptake of screening in areas that traditionally have not. So it's got to be targeted, it's got to be focused, we've got to be able to do and measure.
Measure it to manage it, yeah. Okay, Matt and then.
So I think this is more confirming my understanding.
Yeah.
But when we talk about access to effective treatment, care and support and building what Sarah was just saying, we're not only looking at the range of services available, we're looking at the effectiveness of the delivery of those services, because we should be shining a light on where practice is not consistent, is not, to the same standard. So that's good. The second thing is taking a bit from what Summer was just saying. When we talk about inequality, we're measuring inequality against what objective measure? So do we, I don't want to use the word level up, that's the only expression I can think of. Do we take it to a level that we would say is the best available? Or is it to a level that is satisfactory, and how do you measure that? I'm just not sure what we're comparing inequality to. Does that make sense?
I've done a fair bit of research on this in terms of how to quantify inequalities. Basically, the very off top, the simple metrics are the slope and the relative index of inequality, which is the difference between an outcome in the most and least deprived decile you normally do. That's in terms of deprivation. Relative just means you do that as a percentage, so you can compare different services. We have no national figures and data on, and indeed for Lincolnshire, on the degree to which service and outcomes are expected across different disease groups, different service areas as well. And what you can do is, if you understand, let's just take an example, access to outpatient care, for example, as opposed to urgent and emergency care, you would expect to see one particular slope with a relative index of inequality in emergency care. You'd expect to see a very different one in outpatient care, and then you could drill down into different clinical specialties, different service areas, different disease groups to say, what is the relative index of inequality here? In other words, I would expect, knowing our disease incidence, to have more people from the lower socioeconomic groups, if all else was equal, taking up this service. I'd expect a relative index of this. However, I have the reverse figure. Actually, more people from the higher economic groups take up this service offer, and that's what you'll see in many of your service areas, many of your, and that it's very easy to measure. And Sandra has done some great work on the dashboard already to start this work. We're working with Art and Gem, and it's very quantifiable, and you can see how you're doing quite quickly. Thank you.
Well, it's a taster, of course, so Julie and then
We talk about the clinical and the strategic priorities of 21-22. Have we got something for 22-23? Or is that what we were talking about, doing something in December? So are we in limbo at the moment with priorities for the current fiscal year? Well, part one, because I wasn't sure, or are we continuing these?
So in terms of the 5 clinical priorities, they are likely to continue beyond 22-23. Because
Well, you said 21-22. I was just.
Yeah, they are the same for 22-23.
That's what I was.
So, and the reason being is the national programme, it will take probably 3 years for a lot of those programmes to actually get to the narrowing the gap. So the ultimate target is the 20 years.
That's fine. That's what I just wanted to understand. And therefore, from actually this board's perspective, actually having a dashboard of these and flag rating them and knowing where we're heading for this year would actually be really helpful, because actually it's at a glance in the actions. So I think actually, and then it becomes actually part of our operational performance. In reality, this is what we are trying to do, and it's one of the measures for us. So I think that would be really, really helpful from a board perspective to see, are we on target? If we're not, what actions are we taking to move us there? And I think that's really important.
So mine takes slightly longer to turn, red to green, inevitably, because they're longer burner type things. But I agree with you, so break it down.
Very specific point, actually, on the wider determinants, housing, obviously massive thing. And you mentioned the committee and the various components of that. Do you reach out to housing associations as well? Because they have enormous amounts of data on their communities. And we have enormous opportunity to ask them to build better with damp monitors, so people with asthma don't get ill, and all the kind of prevention agenda, as well as the kind of care side.
Exactly. Yeah, so we're inclusive of all of those aspects, because certainly the picture looks very different when you look at the 7 district council, about what that looks like. If you look at the housing lens that's then contributing to the, as we say, the wider determinants.
Because I know historically they find it very hard to engage with NHS because it's such a big beast, but when you bring it into communities, it's just so much more.
This is.
There's so much more opportunity.
And we built a lot of relationship actually with the housing sector as part of the COVID-19 vaccination programme. There was actually some of our trusted organisations to work with for the community.
Yes.
So.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Sandra. Andy, thank you very much indeed. This is really to give the board an understanding of what work has been undertaken so far, where we're going to next. We're starting from a very positive footing. It's well recognised. It's starting a positive footing in the future. And we will be returning to it. We know that in December we will have a concrete plan up that we'll be prosecuting over the next 5 years as a result of that. But thank you very much indeed.
I'll just start off by saying the report that you've got in your packet, a bit of a legacy report that's been adapted a little bit for the ICB today. You'll see the data in that pack is predominantly relates to the CCGs and the predecessor organisation. So Martin and I have historically had an integrated quality and performance report. So that's what you've got with a bit of system division in there. You'll notice when I speak that a lot of the data that's in there, you'll see it's either from Q1 or it's from May or it's from June. I will tend to give you a bit more of a live update in terms of where things are now, so you can see how we're travelling as an ICB for July. And so that's the bit of the backdrop. We will be developing some new reporting as we go through. So we've been meeting with Dawn around the Service Delivery Performance Committee and how we want that to operate, and then therefore that will inform the kind of reporting that will come up here towards as well, and we'll work with Martin on that. So hopefully that just gives you a bit of a flavour around why this is a bit of a hybrid today of what you'll see in the future. And obviously, Andy's already talked about the kind of backdrop in terms of COVID, so you're well cited on that. Just to give you headline information that we got up to about 170 inpatients, which is where we've been in some of the previous waves. That's dropped today now down to about 64. So it is coming down, which is great news for us and our services. So we talked a bit about urgent and emergency care earlier, and you can see from the report that services continue to operate under significant pressure, and that's particularly noticeable in the report in terms of emergency departments and ambulances. And we tend to talk about ambulance handovers delays as a bit of a barometer, but actually it's not really just about EMAS as we've talked earlier, it's about the symptom of the whole way in which urgent emergency care pathways operate. And that conversation we had earlier about the model's not quite right, so we're not integrating enough in the community as we've heard already today. And if we did that and managed the health of our population differently, then we would see a different flow into hospitals. And then once they're in hospital and people that do need to go in are in there, they don't always get out in a timely fashion. So we see that quite significantly. So what you have happening at the moment is more people going into hospital than are coming out of hospital. So that creates a backlog either in the emergency department or on wards. And we have extensive handover delays at the front door. That then leads to problems in terms of EMAS being able to get out to patients in the community. So you can see from the performance data in here that we have got, up to an hour for category 2. And that's as the point in time of this report at the moment, that is a lot worse. And what we're seeing in Lincolnshire is no different to what we're seeing nationally. So it's a huge focus for us in terms of that pressure. And it's led from a number of things. So it is the increase in demand, it is an increase in acuity. We've obviously got the backlog from COVID and the COVID impact. We've recently had that issue with the heat wave. So it's all of those, plus the fact that the model isn't right in the first place. So all of that contributes to the picture that we're seeing at the moment. And the key to unlocking that is the rapid intervention work through care close to home that you mentioned earlier. And in particularly the work on discharge and flow that we need to do in our system. And all of that will not only help with emergency care pressures, but it'll also help with elective and cancer services, who often are challenged in terms of being able to deliver those. So in the heat wave is a good example. We've had to cancel some outpatient services and some elective services, partly because of the heat wave, so that's slightly different, but also partly because of the pressure and some of the COVID impacts. So you can see as we get pressure in urgent emergency care, not only does it affect those pathways, it also affects wider services. So you'll see in the pack, I do talk about integrated discharge hub, and John referenced this earlier. So this is a really good piece of work that's being done to integrate services around discharge. And Dave mentioned that earlier as well. We need to make sure that primary care and neighbourhood teams are part of that process. So that's just one example of what we need to do, but we need to do much, much more at the front end, but also at the backup services. And hospitals themselves need to do some transformation as well. So this isn't all entirely within the community's gift. The flow through hospital and increasing discharges of people that are within the gift of the hospital to plan for also needs to be worked upon. So we're well aware of both of those. So if I just move away from urgent emergency care then to talk about elective activity. So you'll see from the pack there's quite a lot of information in there about the elective activity coordination hub. So that's a service that we're running from the ICB, but basically works with all of the providers across Lincolnshire. So their focus, as you'll know, has been around making sure that we reduce 104-week wait. So that's people that have been waiting 2 years for their surgery. So you'll see from the report, ULHT has no patients waiting over 2 years now, other than one patient who's chosen for a date in August. So that was a patient choice. So the target is about where you've got capacity issues, you need to reduce that. And our neighbouring providers, we have a small number of residual patients that had a longer trajectory agreed with their region or with their integrated care system. And the majority of those now have got a confirmed date and will be treated by the end of July, with a couple into August where that's a choice issue again. So we've made really good progress, and we build on the back of a very strong elective activity focus in Lincolnshire. And I think we're one of the best, if not the best, in terms of that in our region as well. And we benchmark really well nationally, and you can see that in the data in the report. So our focus now is about the 78-week patients. So these are patients that we need to have reduced by the end of March 23. So there's a big focus on that at the moment, so that we have 0 patients waiting. And it's really important because it's not just about the numbers that you'll see in this report. Every one of those is a patient and a family and a carer that needs to support them. Just also to mention on that, United Lincolnshire Hospitals Trust are providing mutual aid to patients in Leicestershire. and predominantly around orthopaedics, which has been done at Grantham Hospital. And we've been praised for the work that we've done around that as well. And we'll continue to do that where it's appropriate to do so for our services. In terms of diagnostics, I just wanted to mention that from a restoration from COVID perspective, we are now at we've recovered all of the services, but we have had a number of issues, which we talked about at CCG before, but just for this board's awareness. So obviously we had a fire at Lincoln County Hospital, and that had a big impact on our diagnostics. And recently during the heat wave, we've had further problems with our MRI, and particularly with some of the mobile units that we had outside the hospital that were from the fire recovery. So we do have a challenge around MRI at the moment that we are also working through. But in terms of recovery, we have been doing well prior to both of those. I won't mention the CDCs because we talked about those earlier on in the meeting, but again, that information is in the report, so you can see what we're doing around those. In terms of cancer patients, so we've shown an improvement for both 62 and 104 days from the peak that we had earlier on in the reporting. And that continues to improve during this month. We're now at circa about 380 patients, and you'll see from the report we were well over 500, sort of 6-8 weeks ago. So that's going in the right direction. But over 50% of that backlog is in colorectal, and we've talked a little bit about that earlier. We have a colorectal deep dive tomorrow, jointly with East Midlands Cancer Alliance, ULHT and other colleagues in Lincolnshire. And that will help us focus on what sort of short, medium term things that we need to do, plus some of that long-term transformation that we need to do around colorectal services. And it'll build into the points that Sandra and Sunil have talked about earlier. In terms of cancer, though, we do monitor patients for multiple mechanisms, and they are all clinically prioritised. And Martin will be aware of that from a clinical harm perspective as well. So that is all in place and continues as normal. If I could just say a little bit about mental health and learning disabilities. So learning disability health checks. So we are currently 78 patients ahead of where we were this time last year. But we're 15 behind the plan. It's a bit too early to say what the trajectory will be because as Dave will probably agree with, you tend to not always do those at this point in the year. They tend to be towards the end of the calendar year, but actually that's a really good position for us to be in at the start of the year. So that's very positive for us. And I think we will definitely hit the target of 80% by the end of the year. And again, we're one of the very few systems that met that target last year. So that's really great work in the learning disability space. And for mental health, we've got an urgent assessment centre that's now open 24/7 at Lincoln. That takes direct drop-offs from police or ambulance and A&E referrals. So that's really helping with those patients that would historically have gone to an A&E department and spent a disproportionate amount of time there. They now have an alternative place in Lincolnshire, and that is really helping with urgent and emergency care pressures over recent weeks. So that's brilliant news as well. And then in terms of pre-pandemic, we did have a lot of mental health patients in out-of-area acute beds. And that, again, we've done a lot of work on that in Lincolnshire. Sarah, in particular, has been leading some of that work. And we now have that reduced to, in April, it was 0. And with a very odd exception, we're managing to maintain that performance. So again, that's really, really good. So I think I'll leave it there, pass over to Martin for any of the updates he wants to cover, and then I'm happy to take questions.
Yeah. Thanks, Claire. What I'm going to do is just take you through the highlights, and I'll take it by exception only. So I will probably race through it quite quickly because I'm not.
No, assume we've all read it.
And I kind of get it, so I'm not going to go back. And it's always a danger that Claire's mentioned a few things that I was going to and I won't. If that makes sense. So I wanted to open it up just a bit. I think it's useful just to get areas of overall improvement and then areas of overall deterioration in our system. So, and I think the bits that we've really seen a significant difference between last month and this month, particularly around mortality metrics, and all of them across all of our main providers. That's including MLAG and WAF and ULHT. I'm talking about the mortality, Shuni particularly, are all within normal range now. So really pleased to see that, because that's something in previous months that was an area of considerable concern for us. By way of deterioration, and we've heard a bit of that, and I'm talking about in month between this month and last month, Lots of challenge around 12-hour waits and ambulance handover. We've heard about that today a lot, so I won't dwell on that too much. We have some challenge about EIP, which is early intervention in psychosis. Performance wasn't great last month, but it's actually 0 in month, so that's the worst it's ever been. So it is really quite a challenge for us, and that's for all young people to get access to treatment within 2 weeks. They are getting access within 3, so it sort of sounds worse than it is. We've got a good recovery plan in place, and I'm confident, and I did report this last month, it'll take till September first before we'll probably see, if you like, the curve turn in that. So I'm not overly worried about it, but I do need to flag it because it's the first time it's been at 0. So that was probably the main bit. I also wanted you to have noticed today, because I asked one of my other hats in, I have got the lead for children's commissioning, but we've got some new data. You'll see it's gone in there for children and young people, and particularly some of that first contact, and you'll be pleased to see, because particularly in the pandemic, access to mental health support and psychological support for children and young people exponentially increased the amount of young people who needed to access support. But I'm pleased to say our services are holding well in that respect. So you'll see that activity is reasonably quite good in those areas. So I'm pleased to say that. But there's still quite a bit of challenge, particularly about children's eating disorder services and access. A lot of that specialist, not necessarily provided in county, but some challenge around that. The other bit, last a couple of bits a bit, I always like to give an update about serious incidents and never events. We haven't had a never event, so that's really good. I'm pleased to say that. So I don't get by many months not being able to talk about one, and there hasn't been one at all. So that is good news, and I need to flag it. Those of you with a bit more of a laser eye will see we've had 50 serious incidents this month, which is an increase on last month, which was 35. I generally think it's probably about right, though. That should be our run rate between about 45 and 55. I don't want to trivialise them, but I'm actually, given the level of activity in the system and what we've seen in the last month, I'm not overly worried about that. I wanted to give a tiny bit of detail in our system quality group, which sits underneath our quality committee. We did a focus piece of work, particularly with our community providers this month, looking at pressure ulcers. So I just want to flag the fact it is. You'll see when you look at the graph, it really stands out, but there's some very focused work going on to try and understand what's driving that. And it's more about national requirements to report it than necessarily, but nonetheless, we do have some focused work about understanding what we could do different, particularly right down into our care and nursing homes, because a lot of those problems develop in the community, not necessarily in inpatient setting. You'll see there's no big shift and change, which is a great position to be in about the wider care home quality sector. You'll see where we were last month, this month. We have 5 suspensions and we've got a total of 10 default notices across, and that's residential home and care homes. Work quite closely with our colleagues in local authority and Lincolnshire County Council with that. So no major concerns. By way of a good news story, a couple of them really, you'll see SEND. So particularly, actually I found out this week they've been recommended, I haven't shared this with John yet actually, but they have been put forward for a national award. So this is, yeah, special education and needs for people with learning disability. Thank you, John, for need to watch the acronyms, all of us, don't we? Yeah, to some extent. But we have a very vibrant, active young person's voice council that assists us with particularly advising us about services targeted at young people with learning disability or special educational needs. They've developed a rough guide how not to put your foot in it, not how to put your foot in it. There's a link in the paper. I would say as board members, I think it's about 15-minute bit of development. Do have a look at it. It's really, really helpful stuff. And what's good, it's Lincolnshire kids telling us what we could do differently. It's not kids from other parts of the world. It's really, I think, quite obviously huge work that's done locally, and it should be highly recommended. Last couple of things, and then I will wrap it up. We had the Donna Ockington, which is the maternity, as you know, that report landed. We've now had Ockington 2. As part of the kind of a wider regional national assurance process, there was a requirement to do a quality assessment visit of our maternity services at Boston and Lincoln. That was done by the regional team. About 8 of our colleagues came down from region. I was interviewed myself, as was a number of our partners, over a 3-day process. I'm really pleased to say that the outcome of that was really positive. Some really good established government and changes and ways of working across ULHT. I want to congratulate the team. They've done really, really well with that in a relatively short period of time. So there's not to say there's some area of work still to do, but overall that quality assurance visit went very well for our colleagues in ULHT. So I wanted to cite that. We also got cited our MVP, which is Maternity Voice Partnerships, and we've got a chair, specifically Amanda Pike is her name. but she's led some specific work about how we work with military families in the county, and particularly in reality that some of those women don't get great services, and that's that targeted support for that particular group that's gone really, really well of late. So I just wanted to cite that and got regional recognition from the visiting quality teams. And then just last couple of things on the report. I'd like to give an update about where we are with primary care quality. You will see, and I'll put this in a bit of context, we've got 84 practices in Lincolnshire, so we've got a good number of practices. We have 0 practices at inadequate, which is a great position to be in. We do have 4 that requires improvements. They are the same 4 that would have reported last month, albeit that would have been CCG terms, but for the ICB, and that's Lakeside, Marisco, Spalding and Braunston. And I just want to give assurance that continued work carries on with all 4 of those practices to bring forward their agreed recovery plans. I'm not in a sense of worry or concern from the quality team that they're not taking those serious and doing the work they need to do to get to where they need to be. In reality, for those who are not familiar, it usually takes at least 6 months for the CQC team to come back to that particular practice. So that kind of requires improvement badge will stay for at least that period of time until they come back and reassess. That's it, Chair.
Thank you
Just
very
by
much.
exception only.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. So, questions from anybody? When?
Just on the PCNs, we've got 4 in special measures. I would query that because some of them haven't had CQCs in quite a number of years, and particularly, and I will go back to the coast now, because that's where I know best. Something on the coast, not only Marisco, are, I would say, if they had a CQC done to them, were in special measures.
I'll probably come in and then I'll let Sunil come in a little bit. So the programme of assessment didn't really change because a lot of it flipped mixed to virtual, and now what we are seeing now is obviously reinstigating that sort of site inspection, if you like, face to face. So there is probably something for a future development session, Chair, but I can bring in one of my colleagues from the CQC to give you that bit of assurance of what their annual cycle plan is for inspecting all of our practices. But on top of what would be the CQC, which is a bit more the external regulator, we still go in as a, if you like, an ICB quality team. So I kind of get that there might be some concern there, but I just want to give some assurance that we do regularly go out and speak with those practices, and that other bits of intelligence, whether it's complaints, feedback I get from Help Watch, I'm not necessarily, I have got a clear risk register that we sit with PC3, but I don't have that concern about we would have significant challenge if they were re-inspected, but you never quite know until the CQC come in. So I hear the concern, but that's not what the intelligence is telling me at the moment. But we keep a very weathered eye on it.
Well, but maybe rather than get into the detail about that now, that's okay.
Yeah.
Let's pick that up outside. I just wondered if I could make one comment by way of a kind of principle really, and I'm thinking about the September business meeting of the board. I'm quite anxious that once we've achieved an operational performance audit target objective, like 104 weeks, we never go back. We never go back. You know, we never not achieve it anymore. You know? So the next time it's the 78. You know, and it would be really interesting for the September board meeting, besides this report, to just pick up 4 or 5 key things that we should never go back on. So if I just took the elective, the confirmation we've not gone back on the 104 and where we are on 78. So we progressively get a beachhead and waiting we start to tackle it. The colorectal deep dive cancer that you're having tomorrow, it would be very good to have a little bit more of an in-depth feedback about what has been agreed as a system partners we're going to do, and we never go back. You know, we know colorectal cancer is the issue. What's the plan? How can we support? But we never go back to once we've achieved something. We don't flip flop in. You know, that just gives us all confidence. Whatever it would be in mental health, not too many things, but we just gradually build the beachhead out of performance. We don't go back on, and we become a best performer in that particular area and build it out. That's the principle I'd really like us to follow if we can. Which we're doing really well on some of these things, but we don't I typically, I know I've not picked any urgent and emergency care stuff there. But anyway, we can chuck perhaps maybe just the 4 or 5 key things for the September business meeting, I think. Okay, is that all right? That's really, really helpful. Just quick comment.
Just very quick.
Very quick.
Was around just trying to get this more focused about the things that the system are doing. So we talked about urgent care, but there's the front door, the back door, and putting that in place so that the performance is about how we can influence. Because I actually felt like I was a little bit in an acute trust board meeting when we read quite a lot of this, because this is what I would expect to see in an acute trust board meeting. It's where we can really influence things. That I think, but I'm sure that Dawn's going to have a conversation next. She's probably had a conversation.
It's about assisting people to do it somehow, isn't it? It's I think once the system achieve these things, so how do we support them that we never, you know, we make realistic progress. I think and build this sort of reputation for our patients that we don't. In and out of the time we've achieved it. Thank you very much, Lee. That's been really, really helpful. Thank you. Okay, if we could move on to the next item, which is core purpose 3, item 6. We've got 15 minutes on this. Matt, assume you've read it all.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So this, as Claire was saying, this also marks a sort of a hybrid from CCG to an ICB. We used to do a CCG report with a bit of system. I've actually turned it into a system report with a bit of CCG in reality. There's some quite important themes on here, and we're trying to bridge the transition from CCG to ICB in the way the narrative's been structured. So this is month 3, it's June, and it's the end of quarter 1. Just navigating the report, we've got a summary financial position, which is probably the most useful part of it. There's a bit around financial context, which largely talks to the planning and the planning process that we've just come through. And then it talks about a revenue position. I will in future supplement that with a capital position as well, so we get both. And then there's a section on risks, and I've also just highlighted a few actions from here. I'm asking the board to note the content of the report and endorse the actions that are underway, and they are actually underway in any event. So from a sort of what's the overall message perspective, at the end of Q1, the system was ahead of its financial plan by 2 million. So posted a 3 million surplus against the 1 million surplus plan. The CCG position in that was favourable by 7 million, and the providers collectively were adverse by 5, but that was all vested in one organisation. The provider position was 4 million, but 5 million of that was vested in one organisation, that's ULHC. There's a complexity in the transition, which means that any CCG under or over performance is novated into the ICB, which means essentially the CCG underspend of 7 million gives a little boost to the ICB finances in the second part of the year. So that's the first thing. That's just the complication. That's a one-off. And actually, if you read the comments, most of the benefits are one-offs, and essentially they're unspent from a previous year that I didn't have to declare that year, and it's useful for us to post that in at this stage. There's no downside. What's more interesting is the provider position specifically. So what I would have expected at the end of quarter 1 for there to be somewhere between a 2 and 3 million adverse provider position, because we knew that we planned for a low COVID levels of COVID, and that the ULHT was clocking up about £1.5 million worth of pandemic costs per month. So we knew in the month of June, without low COVID, we could realistically expect a lot of that to be spent. We also knew that we were behind on the efficiency programme that we had in place, and I've referenced already something called the risk gain share arrangement. We enacted that about 4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, because we knew that to be the case. So we knew we would be behind on those. But what actually this tells us, the position tells us, is that we've got more beds, far more beds, about 150 more beds than target open in our acute facilities, and Claire's already talked about it. And also we've got much higher bank agency. The trajectory John referred to at the start, around 40 million, actually the trajectory is for about 50 million, which is double what you'd call a normalised level. So we've got an issue with the number of beds open, we've got an issue with the costs of staffing those beds, and we've got pandemic costs. So a number of those you can see are reversing, but a number of those require actions to reverse. So just getting into the actions that we've agreed. We have already enacted the risk gain share arrangements, which is effectively how we get efficiency back on track, and that's referenced in the paper. We're also going through the last stages of putting in place an investment panel, which essentially puts 2 layers of approval over any investment anywhere in the system, with the provider, with ourselves and the ICB. So it's a provider board plus an ICB board, and that won't really be a board, it'll be a subset of it that takes that action. And those are things that we agreed at the time of setting the plan. The third thing that we're doing, which is something we were asked to do, is a review of financial governance arrangements, particularly around financial control. And it's the theme of improving grip, having had 2 years of really, if we needed to spend it, we'd spend it. We're now having to reassert sort of stronger controls over all our expenditure. So the audit work will expose the strength of our underlying financial governance principles. And finally, again, this was influenced by national direction of travel. It's looking back at pay controls. And what's interesting is that despite the fact that we don't control pay from this room, from this board, it was me that was written to by the regional HR director of HR to understand our system controls around pay, and it was looking at 3 things: the quantum of pay that is bank and agency, the extent to which nationally approved frameworks for recruiting and bringing those staff in are being used, and the third was the extent to which the pay rates paid are in line with those frameworks. And in all 3 of those, we're not meeting what's usual or expected. Unsurprisingly, we're double the rate. So there's a number of really significant questions to get into, and we will be evolving that over the next few weeks. I'm happy to take any questions.
So thanks very much, Dave, Matt. And we could get into great detail, but we've got committees stuff, and so it's a very good exposition about where we are. So right, any immediate questions?
Just one, and we will pick it up in the Finance Commission. The CIP identified of 19 million is huge, and we only have 8 months to go. So I think that's a really big challenge we need to be aware of. So I think it's one of the key points. These risks, I suspect, will be a very important part of the Finance Committee. And Matt and I sit down and talk through some of these things together. I think that's where the risks are coming from.
Perhaps we ought to just record that for the September business meeting. We need to create time and space on the agenda to have a good look at that and identified efficiency risks that we haven't found, and what's been done between now and then to cover that risk of. We'll make sure. John.
Just to make a general, ultra specific point, the key to us coming through the next period of months in better shape than the other would do is the whole discharge flow bit around hospital, because that will help with ambulance handovers, it'll help take excess beds out, it'll help with local and agency costs, it'll help with the recovery support programme, it'll help with protective services for cancer patients, for protecting a waiting list, And obviously it will help in terms of whatever winter has in store for us. So whilst we're getting separate reports on different aspects, I just want to make sure the board is aware that it's not the only game in town, but it's the most significant immediate issue in front of us that if we could get the other side of, we will be in a much better position than we currently are. And there is a huge amount of work going on in relation to that, which Matt, Sonil, a whole range of colleagues are landmarking and putting improvements in place literally on a daily basis in relation to
That's really, really important. Yeah. And can I raise one other point about the agency? You mentioned a figure of 40 million on agency spend. I mean, again, if we can, a much longer term, get a handle on this, that is a huge thing to go at, isn't it? Honestly. And I'm just thinking about September meeting as well. I mean, sorry, but besides the overall financial position, that there is an issue about the recovery program and a system moving. We'll need 2 quarters, won't we? Quarter 3 up to the end of December, quarter 4 up to the end of March. So the improvements against the recovery program for us to consider coming in as a system out of special measures, effectively 4 to 3 or whatever. And they're 2 different things. They're intertwined, but I think it's part of our job under this core purpose 3 to be moving ahead. Yeah, and that shows a trajectory that's on the up in a strong financial place. So again, a lot of work, and a massive amount of work is going on in that and all that. But I think it's quite useful as a board to be aware of that, to have a bit more of a deep dive in the core purpose where it gets the business from top. Is there any other, or should we move on, or I might pick that up, or what you were going to say? Right. Okay, yeah.
Just on local agency staff, do we actually have a handle on how much is being spent in primary care? I would imagine the figures are huge.
Well, no, it's not monitored.
Does the 40 million pick up primary care?
No. No, it'll be with the three trucks.
Right. That's very interesting. Well, let's do some.
And sorry, Andrew, just in case the number gets embedded, we're running towards 50 million, not 40 million. Right now.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, that's really helpful. Now, thank you very much indeed. They're high level things, but we've got 4 or 5 pointers there to lead us into all that. We need to have a look at. Thank you. Thanks, Matt. Okay, we'll note that as a policy action. So we move on to core purpose 4, the 4th core purpose that will Lincolnshire-rise in due course, but this already is being that way. So it's social and economic value that we can provide to Lincolnshire. So over to you, Pete, I think, and welcome also to Jackie.
Thanks, Chair. So obviously one of the 4 core purposes is that broader social and economic development that the ICSs have to kind of, and the ICB within the NHS have to work to and act on. And I think this purpose of this kind of paper and presentation is to demonstrate this work that has already been ongoing in the system, because the strong system work we have hasn't been framed within the core purpose. It's been framed within that kind of integration, and the work with partners in terms of driving. Something. That's what we want to do. So in terms of driving that social and economic development, so in areas like the Towns Fund bid, which we'll discuss now, there's levelling up, there's the UK Shared Prosperity work taking place as well, and colleagues within the ICB and 4 partners within some of that work with colleagues in the local authority, third sector, going forward. So this is work to demonstrate we've already heavily involved with it, and what we've asked to do is get Jackie Bunce, who's within my team, who's the programme director for strategic state planning and partnerships, and has been, to be fair, heavily involved in the Towns Fund bit that have gone through and really led the way when it was the CCG on behalf of the CCG and the system, which is now really heavily involved from an ISA perspective. Just to quickly talk through the presentation to give the board an update on the kind of work that's taken place and where we've got to today.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Pete. A lot of this is self-explanatory, so I'm not going to go through it specifically, but picking up that 4 pillars work, it touches on the work that Sandra and I do around the health inequalities, and that's where a number of those initiatives were focused on, which was those towns and districts that were furthest away from where government and everyone else wanted them to be. But also for us as an ICB, that economic and social development. And it has brought us, I think, much more prominently into those partnerships through this work than we were before. And out of that, it has created unforeseen opportunities that we didn't have before because of we're joining the dots and those connectors. So I know you mentioned, Claire, the diagnostic centres this morning. Yesterday, I was on a call with the team looking at the site in Skegness that isn't on the open market, but because of the work I'd done with the Skegness Towns Fund and the chair of that board, he was able to suggest some sites that he knew were potential opportunities, and we were therefore able to have a really good conversation about a really good site that we wouldn't have known about had we not had those relationships and that way of working to be able to do that. And there are an awful lot of those examples that just keep coming out of the woodwork as we join the dots between education and the wider NHS leadership and development through the universities. The football clubs have been really strong in terms of their partnership working to see how they might use space with the primary care networks, etc. So there were, back into 2019, the announcement of the Towns Funds, and they were around towns, not districts. So for us, actually, we had 2 within one district council, which was Skegness and Mablethorpe, which when you look at the size of that council, that's a huge amount of capital investment going into that area. And they had to develop those boards, which had both business, public sector and partners around the table, develop those business cases, submit them, get them agreed, and then work on the individual project business cases, which they did up until March of this year. So of that potential 100 million, we're actually really successful area. So for 2 of them to get within 24 and 23 million of that is a huge achievement. And the least successful had 19 million, which again is really good. Those were business cases that had to meet Treasury Green Book standards. So there were investment committees and technical groups underneath the Towns Fund boards that looked at those individual ones, of which I sat on a number of those groups and committees. So for Boston, this is around adult learning, is the flagship. It's called the Mayflower because of the Hanseatic links that Boston has. I'm very much working with Boston College, which is actually one of the 5th rated in the country in one of our poorest areas. So it's about how we support and develop them. And that is also now linking into what that means for health and social care, for apprenticeships in some of our estates and facilities, and working through that as well. And we've made the links with ULHT in terms of placements and those sort of things. And Sandra opened the building, which is part of their extension. And so the Mayflower will be their flagship one in Boston. But there's also schemes around some of the historic buildings within Boston that you'll see in the list, and the train station. And we're also, as part of the Levelling Up, working with them on a scheme that links that's train station to the historic town, and potentially looking at a health and care development within that, which is a Levelling Up 2 bid. So these are just some of the diagrams. So the top ones are the Mayflower with its look of a ship upturned in terms of the roof, but it's next door to the Jeff Mulder Centre. So we're making those links between leisure and learning. And there are rooms and treatment rooms within the leisure centre that we will be able to use as a primary care network. And they had some early funding, which they've used very much to increase the heritage offer, but also in terms of transport and logistics and a 3G pitch for one of their academy schools. So in Skegness, there's work around a college, the foreshore at the railway station, and the Embassy Theatre on the seafront is being turned into one of the first culture houses, but again, having a learning and leisure, and that digital learning has been woven into that. And because we've got some of the least active people in our county there, how we attract people to that coastline for active and not necessarily costed walking is going to be something that is really part and parcel of not just the buildings, but how they're utilised going forward. So there is a trail, but there's also that seafront and how we make that accessible to people as well. So just a few pictures there for people, and I can talk for Britain on these at any point in time. So Mablethorpe, again, as we know, an area that really challenged. There was some great work with the local people about what they wanted, and a part of the town's funds was actually around that public engagement about what mattered to them. And so there's quite a lot around the town centre and the public realm, and working with the National Trust around what was a golf course and bringing that back into use. And obviously the flagship project that we're all involved in, which is the Campus for Future Living, which is across the road from our Mablethorpe practice, which is Morisco. Again, some pictures for you to look at. But the Campus for Future Living, which is a national exemplar on, if we're using Mablethorpe almost as a living lab with the population of the practice, how do we work with the Medical Technologies Innovation Facility faculty at Nottingham Trent, University of Lincoln, Health Education England, and others to really look at how we bring innovative science and technology into an area that, as we've done with the agri-food side in Lincolnshire, really raise the profile of Lincolnshire and inward of investment, because that will all help with recruitment, retention that we've heard around the level of agency staff that we're using. We've got accommodation on the site as well to help people to be able to stay there, to do placements, to really see what's out there for people. And so we're hoping that the spades will be in the ground on this one towards the end of this year. So it's a really exciting project that both Sandra and I are on the steering group for, and people won't be surprised to see that I did put my hand into some of the design work of the actual building as well from previous experience. I thought this was quite a useful diagram just to show some of the linkages and some of the outputs and work that will be coming out of that. It links to the research that the university is doing with the Centre for Ageing Better and the rural health work in the university. And then Lincoln was very much around the historic centre, bringing in regeneration around the Sinsel Bank area as well. And again, how that culture and digital economy attracts people into Lincolnshire and attracts further investment as well. And a number of these buildings that, as you see, are being repurposed to be able to give people that opportunity to learn and meet. So you've got education through the hospitality, events and tourism, the football club, really looking at that as a community hub for one of our most deprived wards within Lincoln, but also they're working with the primary care network as well about how that space could be used flexibly there. And again, how we use those other historic sites, not only as a tourism offer, but as a business offer as well for repurposing and reusing those spaces. So levelling up is words that people will have heard a lot about. There was the Levelling Up 1 funding bid, which was successful for West Lindsey and the County Council. And the current round of Levelling Up portal is now open, and we know there are bids being worked on by City of Lincoln, East Lindsey, Boston and South Holland councils, and we've been involved in a number of those to be able to support those bids going in. That is a competitive process, whereas the Towns Funds, it was an allocation and you had to sort of put your plans up against that allocation. This is a competitive tendering process, and they will hear in the spring, I think. So the examples that we had for West Lindsey are highlighted there. And then very much the Levelling Up is linked to the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, which replaces some European funding that has been around for some time and is not to the same quantum. So there has been tensions between the county council and the districts about how those funding streams get linked, and we have continuity of some of the very good things that came out of the European funding, and then how do the districts work through that, but with one eye on the devolution agenda, recognising that how those are going to get managed in the future could very well change as we move forward on that devolution journey. So I just thought I'd link some of the UK Shared Prosperity and how it links to the Levelling Up missions, 12 of them, and I've highlighted that in this slide. And again, it's around community and place, of which our place-based primary care teams are being very much embedded within those, supporting local businesses. And of course, we have an economic footprint which is significant compared to other parts. But again, it's about people and skills. The more we can support people to live well, it links into the wider determinants of health and well-being, into jobs, into housing, etc. And we've got some areas where the GVA is significantly lower than the national average. And so this is the allocations of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. So again, it's an allocation like the Towns Funds, and then it's submitting bids around how they want to spend that money. And what 3 of the districts have said is that they want to use the Towns Fund boards as the footprint for managing the governance around those shared prosperity funds and build on that. So it's not a task and finish group. They actually see this as a legacy partnership way of working. I'll leave it there.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Brilliant. Thank you for that. Really good. Such a lot going on there, isn't it? Thank you. I think it's more just to kind of bring everybody up. I mean, some people know all about this, but bring us more up to speed. But anything else you want to say?
I just think obviously to know that we need to get more. It's like we said at the start, we need to get away from the operational kind of day-to-day kind of pressures and things, not just reading position. And it's a huge part of addressing health inequalities, local place, employment opportunities, and all the rest of it. It's broader than just the healthcare and delivery. Jack's done a fantastic job being involved in the Towns Fund, but it's obviously an area that we need to get more involved in as we get forward.
Anybody want to say anything? Colleagues on the screen want to say? Martin?
It's just a comment that, Jackie, you've made it several times, but it's the opportunity of capitalising on other partners' premises and maybe to flip the mirror, because there'll be an opportunity of some NHS premises that could be opened up to our public that we don't currently do, isn't it? And it's great examples of some of our schools and colleges that are not used during the summer months sometimes, but there's opportunities where venues could be, or where we've got capacity during the week, isn't it? And it's to get that shift of thinking, Jack, which I felt really came strong in your presentation, that because we all sometimes need space, but we don't need that space all the time. But if we could have our services, particularly from a population health point of view, where people already are, you're already starting to build the opportunity for access in a way that you don't have to go out of your way to get your blood pressure checked. Is that, you know what I mean? So I don't want to make it as a trivial point, but it is a really important opportunity that we need to capitalise on.
Lovely, thank you. Fantastic presentation. Thank you, actually. Really good, thank you. Okay, so we'll let that obviously come back to it. So I'd like to take you on to item 8.1 governance. Now I'm just going to ask Jonathan to give a very quick update, Jonathan, if you wouldn't mind, from the primary care commissioning meeting that you chaired, and then Dawn, a very quick update from the one you've done. And normally, just so we're clear, we'll have report backs from the various committee meetings, you know, very short kind of side of A4 report, but they're verbal at the moment, and it's just a quick feed in. So Jonathan, if you wouldn't mind, your meeting. Thank you. Chair Jerry.
Okay, so the primary care meeting, I think it's fair to say, began with focusing on relatively immediate problems that were more in the management space than the strategic space, but really through talking those through, we got into the strategic issues a bit more. And most of the early part of the discussion was really discussion about Spalding, about the loss of a primary care practice there, and about the potential measures that can be put in place to redistribute the population to other practices and possibly bring on another branch practice, accepting that there are some reservations about branch practices. There is kind of an immediate need here. One of the things that I pushed on quite hard was the fact that, of course, patients don't like it when they lose access to their much loved, you know, years ingrained primary care provider. But what we should stick to as a principle in trying to engineer all of this is the least number of patients moved, and absolutely patients only ever moved once, and with a very clear and open explanation about why it was happening, rather than you know, no dressing up, in other words, of messaging that somehow this is, you know, for your own good, as it were, just to admit that it's not ideal. Just be very plain and say this is not ideal, but there isn't much else we can do. But it then began to touch upon some of the wider work, which I think needs driving forwards and giving more bandwidth and more resources, which is about essentially future-proofing primary care offerings across Lincolnshire, and in a way increasing the degree of stability in what is being offered, so that we don't kind of lurch from dealing with one particular outage to another. So we didn't get very far on that agenda, but I think it came through clearly enough that is the elephant in the room, really, how one stabilises the strategic offering on primary care for the county. Over.
Thank you.
I think the point is really well made, and I think we heard this morning, resilience.
Yeah.
And let's call it primary care offer, not just general practice offer, is a key bit of strategy that we have to work across the whole of our system, because that will be the fundamental foundation which we can build lots of other things really not right. And I do think we need to work through it. So colleagues, now we have just about starting to work on things like secondary access. Plan is probably towards October, November, Chair, we'll bring something back. Just to test, see where we are.
Okay, thank you very much.
Jonathan touched on a specific practice in the Spalding area, and I would just like to give credit to our health staff and colleagues who actually got on the front foot with getting that message out to both residents and indeed councillors as well, and the local MP. So there were no surprises. There is still concern, obviously, but the way that it was done has to be applauded because people feel as though they're being kept in the loop. So, thank you for that.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting what Jonathan said, actually. I think PCNs and potentially federations have a huge role to play in ensuring that the practices in their area are stable for the future. We're very fortunate in South West. We have a very strong federation of 16 practices, and one of our fundamental objectives is to actually make sure that those 16 practices are stable and fit for the future, and we work very closely together to support each other. As soon as there's any issues, we're on it and we try and resolve it. And I think that's potentially a model across the county that we need to try and encourage.
Smashing. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, thank you, John.
So, Chair, I think what I'm hearing back around the table is that there is quite a strong unity of purpose here. That essentially we all know that what we're talking about is that Lincolnshire does not always attract the number of physicians as permanent residents that it would like to, and that until we get the Lincoln Medical School actually delivering some kind of homegrown physicians who want to stay in the area, this is going to be a problem area. Though Lincoln Medical School should not be seen as the magic bullet, but there is just something a bit bigger about how we future-proof this. And I don't think we've got those solutions yet, but I think it's a very clear priority that this ICB should take forwards. Over.
Yeah, thanks, John. And as we move into a care closer to home model, we need to dock into something. We need to dock in to primary care that is stable. Now, it feels to me we'll probably have to do that in phases and neighbourhood, practices first, piloting. Stating the obvious, but that's the way we'll probably have to do it, so that we dock into something that can take it and then lift the load of it as well. Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Let's move on to the other committee, which I know was more of a process set up.
Yes, it is.
So do you want to say which committee it was?
So this is the Service Delivery and Performance Committee. We haven't held a full committee meeting as such, but we have had a couple of preparatory meetings. So I've had a really useful meeting with Pete and Claire around what we went before, what kind of current priorities, all of which you've heard about in the performance report. And then I've had the opportunity to have a kind of two-way meeting with Di Bailey and Gail Shallow, who've agreed to be NEDs from the Health Trust and Community Trust. I think we're still awaiting the Lincoln new NED who will join the committee once they're appointed. Whether they know that or not, I don't know. But so we're still waiting for them to actually be appointed. And we've set all our dates from September through to March, and they're all agreed with the NEDs Trust, which is great because they're busy people. I'm immensely grateful to them actually because they're doing this as well as their trust responsibilities. So and we had a great meeting yesterday. We had a real good meeting of minds, let's say. I think for us, the first meeting will be very much about setting the scene, making sure we are taking that system view, really concerned that we're not just regurgitating what we do in the trust boards, because that adds no value, but it is keeping that trust, that system view. And I think there's a real challenge on the terms of references to, do we just look at the immediate priorities, or are we looking more strategically at the objectives, and what do you want the committee to do? So I think the other NEDs have quite strong values around that, quite strong kind of, thoughts and views around that. But I think we need to bottom out exactly what the committee can do best to add value. And that's something we'll talk about first meeting when we thrash through in terms of reference, which I suspect will get quite a strong challenge. We also talked to one of the NEDs around, the enablers. Where's the oversight of people? Where's the oversight of the digital side? And I think again, you mentioned there's work going on that. We need to spy where that lands and be best give the oversight scrutiny it needs. And then there's a couple of other areas we spoke around the Green Board, which I think you've had in the start. I don't know where that sits now, and estates infrastructure, that kind of area. I'm not quite sure where that sits now because I'm new, but we need to find out how the oversight of that sort of stuff fits, where that will go in the kind of governance structure. And also we felt there's quite a lot of potential for overlap with performance in the quality area, in the finance area, decisions that have to be made on where you put your money for the biggest impact. So I think within time, we need to kind of figure out how we deal with that, and whether we have joint meetings or how we do it. But I think just lots of things to sort of bed down and settle. But, you know, hopefully we're asking the right questions. I mean, that the governance structure that we feel that works.
That's great.
Just to add for information, Dawn, and everybody, that Sarah Connery is the chief executive and currently leads all of our strategic estates, etc. bits. Jackie works hand in glove with Sarah in terms of doing that,
Right.
and the green agenda is very much part of that overall work that Sarah leads forward for us. So that, just to make that connection, Dawn.
It's kind of the oversight of it, and, you know, as a board, how we're assured that we're comfortable, everything is as it should be. So
Yeah.
Thank you. I think they're the only committees so far that have met, but lots going on now as we begin to, and please, as I say, you know, challenge in terms of reference as a system where there to create the environment for all providers, deliverers, big organisations, small organisations to succeed. And, you know, if they fail, we all fail. So succeed, we all succeed. That's the kind of environment we're trying to create. So that's great.
Yes, I think unlike other systems, those committees are within the house. So they're not involved in system partners. Therefore, it will take us a bit longer to get them ready, get them working effectively going through. I think that pain is well worth the benefit we'll get at the end from doing it in a connected way, rather than an inward looking what's going on in performance without partners around the table who are involved in delivery and being involved in those discussions. So I think the enrichment we'll get from that kind of discussion that outweighs the kind of difficulty, which will have to be difficult having months to try and start to get there.
Thank you.
Yes.
Just a quick observation. I asked Sandra in the break about the health inequalities work and how it was linked into any kind of population forecasting. Because obviously Lincolnshire, with its ageing population, we all talk about it, but we seem to not do much about it. And I was thinking that some of this information and that you're working on here needs to feed into what the services committee is recommending for the pipeline that we've got coming along, for what services in future focus we need to have for Lincolnshire, and to make sure that those linked in.
That's what we do, and Andy Fox, public health, that's what we do all the time at county council, and that's what we share with NHS.
Yeah.
All work soon.
But Sandra didn't.
I think we're just saying part of the roadmap, we can then map it in terms of when it links back to the health inequality strategy.
I think it's a fair point. It's just been raised. One thing as a system we do have to do is make sure that the left hand and the right hand know what each other are doing and the one we're not duplicating.
Absolutely right. I mean, just on, if I could, I mean, just on those two committees that we just had, one in many respects, Dawn, is more the here and now. I would put it, if I put it that way. Jonathan's is more the future, and how that's the way I think I put it as we try. But I don't know. That's perfect. John, is that right? Is that right? You designed it.
Yeah, no, I think we need to evolve our thinking. I mean, on primary care, there are a lot of operational responsibilities, essentially about practices who get into trouble, need a bit of help, or whatever that needs to be managed. But alongside that, it comes back to our overall balance issue. There needs to be some really deep thinking that's been going on, but needs to take place through PC3 in terms of this issue about a stable, innovative, dynamic primary care sector going forward. That is much more than just general practice. Well, obviously, it's absolutely its heart. I would say. The other thing I would add is I think Michelle's point is spot on. Looking at the recent census information, for example, the population of the county has gone up about 50,000 in the last 10 years. So that obviously raises questions about what that has meant for general practice, what it's meant for health services, what it's meant for the expansion and the evolution of healthcare in the county, especially where that has been across the county, what sort of people, what sort of age range, all that sort of stuff. but also it's a bit of a classic that we do come across where, you know, under the broad aegis of expanding the population, you know, housing developments get put up, and then there's where's the general practice in the middle of that? Where's access to healthcare services in the middle of that? And so it's a really smart point I think Michelle makes. So we clearly know what the general direction is, but the joining up the left hand and the right hand, so to speak, there's more to be done.
Indeed, yeah. Thank you very much, Dean. Can I turn now to Jules? Anything else on 8.1 that you wanted to? Yeah.
Do that in 2 minutes. It's just, it's part of the closed down process of the CCG. All the committees produced a handover template. So you've got a briefing from QPEC, Plans and Performance, Performance Committee, and PC3. All is probably a little bit more detailed because they produce an annual report alongside that, and the self-assessments in that. The other committees did self-assessment, but they're just not included because they weren't referred to specifically in their handovers, but they are available should anybody particularly really watch them. Also, when we're allowed to publish it formally, it might be quite helpful for everyone to have the CCG annual report. We haven't actually been given an official publication date at the moment. So although it is done and dusted, isn't it, Mr. Gordon, along with the accounts? But it's actually quite informative.
Yeah, no, I made that up. Let's have that there, that'll be great. Thank you, thanks, Jules. Okay, John, is there any other business or?
I think it's been a great meeting, Alan, actually, but there's nothing more from me at the moment. Lots to think about, and you know, we need to evolve our thinking, don't we, through the August development sessions, the September board. So from my perspective, I think I'd welcome any, you know, if you model the meeting, have any reflections on it or want to share, please do so. I don't need to wait till the next meeting comes up.
Anybody else want to raise anything? Anybody else want to raise anything? If not, my apologies that we're a few minutes late, but I feel it's been a really good meeting.